All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's work group on proposed heavy-duty investments for the fiscal year 2022 to 23 funding plan. My name is Rochelle Bishop, and I'm the manager over our Clean Truck and Bus Incentive Project, better known as HVIP and the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust. I'm joined today by several other CARB staff to share our initial thoughts and hear your feedback on how to administer the investments in heavy-duty vehicles and off-road equipment included in the governor's proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year. Before we get started, a little information on work group logistics. Today's work group is being recorded, and a copy of the recording will be posted on CARB's low carbon transportation webpage within about the next 2 weeks. Today's work group is really intended to be a conversation. Throughout the afternoon, we will pause for questions and comments, and at that time, we will ask that you raise your hand to let us know that you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. CARB staff will then unmute your line. For those of you participating via phone, please press #2 to raise your hand. For those of you participating, or you may also use the Q&A box to ask questions. We'll remind you of these instructions throughout the work group. And as always, we appreciate your patience if we run into technical glitches. Today's meeting will build off discussions that began as a part of last week's work group on the funding plan for clean transportation incentives. We will be getting into greater detail about our heavy-duty and off-road equipment investments and share initial thoughts on potential policy changes and allocations to our existing projects. You'll hear many of the same key themes and focuses within these investments, ensuring that our incentives support equity goals and provide support to small fleets and owner-operators, undertaking measures to accelerate the deployment of these advanced technologies in disadvantaged communities, and using incentives to bolster the market in advance of regulatory deadlines. While we will provide a bit of an overview of our existing heavy-duty incentive projects and the process of developing the funding plan, for those seeking additional background, I'd encourage you to take a look at the slides from last week's work group. We'll add a link in the chat. Additionally, the recording of last week's work group will be posted to CARB's low carbon transportation website within the next week. With that, I will turn it over to Jason Crow to discuss our updates to our long-term heavy-duty investment strategy. Jason?
Thank you, Rochelle. The heavy-duty investment strategy is CARB's long-term strategy for clean transportation incentives funding. It serves as a roadmap showing how state incentives can help spark private sector investment and create the kinds of partnerships that are necessary to support the transformation of the heavy-duty and off-road sectors. It also identifies some of the key priority areas for investment that will help to ensure a smooth and continued transformation in the heavy-duty space. And it's updated annually, covers 3 years of funding, and is accompanied by an annual report on the current status of the state school bus fleet. CARB's heavy-duty investments are legislatively guided by Senate Bill 1204, and SB 1204, also known as the California Truck, Bus, and Off-Road Vehicle and Equipment Technology Program, was established in 2014. It calls for utilizing California climate investment funds for the development, demonstration, pre-commercial pilot, and early commercial deployment of eligible heavy-duty vehicle and equipment technologies. The subsequent passage of SB 1403 investments of both SB 1204 and SB 1403. CARB's investments help to support advanced technologies across the entire commercialization pathway, providing a way for the transformation of heavy-duty projects to help meet our air quality and climate goals. CARB uses a variety of metrics to track progress of different vehicle and equipment technologies and vocations as they move through different programs in CARB's larger portfolio of incentives. Metrics that have been developed for the heavy-duty investment strategy can be grouped into 3 broader categories. These are creating healthy communities, supporting technology evolution, and growing the green economy. Staff will continue to build on and improve these metrics. The success of CARB's heavy-duty programs build on one of the primary guiding concepts directing the priorities in the heavy-duty investment strategy, and this is the concept of beachheads. Beachheads are first success applications that provide a path for the transfer and extension of the technology to additional vehicle applications in subsequent markets. The zero emission pathway is centered on the first applications in zero emission transit bus and the zero emission transit bus market, and show how even with a relatively small initial volume, it has formed the basis for a successful first marketplace and a stepping stone for additional uses of the same core technologies and architectures. Each year's heavy-duty investment strategy document includes several core elements, and this year's document will include an updated discussion on the beachhead strategy, updates on the current status of the advanced heavy-duty vehicle and equipment technologies, an expanded discussion of market readiness indicators, an update on the metrics of success, some new examples of what's happening in the industry by means of a series of mini case studies, and an updated 3-year set of recommendations and recommended funding levels for heavy-duty vehicle and off-road investments. CARB's heavy-duty investment strategy will continue to support progress towards meeting state climate and federal air quality targets, supporting the accelerated deployment of zero-emission technologies per the governor's executive order. CARB will also be working in coordination with CPCFA in the implementation of SB 372, which directs CARB to make financing tools and non-financial supports available to the operators of medium and heavy-duty vehicle fleets. We're also going to look to identify emerging technologies and next-generation technologies that build on previous successes. The strategy will continue to report on and develop those metrics that track progress made towards achieving the larger program goals, and it will continue to affirm and expand on ways to achieve our equity goals through CARB's investments in the heavy-duty vehicle and off-road sectors. I'd also like to highlight that we do have a work group meeting on the heavy-duty investment strategy planned for the afternoon of April 6th, and details on that should be released shortly. And that concludes the heavy-duty investment strategy overview, and now we can open it up for questions and comments. And I'll turn to Aria.
Thank you, Jason. Good afternoon, everyone. For those of you joining by phone, please press pound or #2 to raise your hand. If you're joining us using the Zoom platform, please raise your hand using the button at the bottom of your screen. With that, do we have any raised hands? First up, we have Beverly Deschaux. Beverly, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, Beverly Deschaux. I'm with the Electric Vehicle Association, Central Coast Chapter. I've asked this question previously, and I don't know that I really got an answer. I'm wondering if, when you consider equipment, if you're considering bidirectional charging equipment, because we here on the Central Coast are interested in microgrids, as I know people across the state are as well. And we believe that the school buses, if they would have bidirectional charging, our schools already have solar, many of them do. And we think it would be the perfect place for community resilience hubs and microgrid strategy that can be utilized from the bidirectional charging.
Thank you for that question. I know vehicle grid integration is one of the things that we're looking at in the heavy duty strategy. And I also know that several of our programs do incorporate different forms of VGI or V2G. And I don't know if any of the other staff on today's call want to point to anything that's going on.
If I may just add to that, although I know that the IOUs are interested in the V2G technology, we particularly who in the areas that have CCAs are interested in V2 building to have our microgrids be behind the meter so that we have local control over them, as opposed to the utilities which have dominated the industry, and we are looking to regain some, I shouldn't say regain, but looking to gain some local control with our community resilience hubs, also known as microgrids.
Great. Thank you for sharing that.
So with regard to that,
I'm sorry, are you asking if we have any projects that are like that, or if we're investing in that?
no, if you are including that technology in grants that are being made available.
I
by
believe,
direction.
yeah, I believe we are including that in some of our grants. Today, I'm just speaking to the larger heavy duty investment strategy, but I think as we get into some of the individual projects, I think some of the staff may be able to share some more details on where that is taking place. And again, if anyone else wants to speak to this point.
So I guess I'm asking, would we be able to apply for funding for that technology?
I'm going to put someone on the spot here. I know our Clean Mobility in Schools project has looked at vehicle to grid integration. I don't know, Heather,
Yeah.
if you have anything on that, great.
No, I figured you were gonna put me on the spot. Hi, Beverly. We did talk at the last meeting too, so
Yes.
I did take notes, and definitely I'm excited about your interest in this project, that type of technology. And those are the kinds of feedback that I believe Jason and our staff are looking for the long-term plan. So how can we work with the utility providers and the different areas that want V2G or V2 X or all of those kinds of opportunities. So it's really important that you participate. And the only thing is, like, I just want to make sure that it's clear that we don't, these meetings going forward this year are really to talk about where to put our funds and how to focus any policy changes or technology advancements into our program. So I think your conversation here is really important, but also just to make sure you're aware that we don't have anything to offer yet. Like, this is all sort of in the works. We're trying to make sure we're advancing the pushing the needle, or is that the right term? Anyways, pushing something, but yeah,
moving forward.
Yes.
Moving forward.
But it's in terms of can you apply for something like that now? No, we don't really have anything like that available, especially not in the school arena yet. But I love that you want this, and so please keep telling us and tell all your friends too.
Yes, and just to be clear, we are really clear about that. We would like it to be behind the meter. So I don't know if there's a different type of technology that's necessary for bidirectional. I kind of think there isn't. I kind of think it's the same thing, but I just want to keep emphasizing for anyone else who's on the call as well, that we are very clear about wanting this to be behind the meter, where when the grid goes down, we have power, and that we do not want it to be controlled by the IOUs, that we have gone through years of getting our CCAs together and for local control, and we would like to make sure that that is what happens going forward. Thank you for listening and appreciating what I'm saying.
Sure. Yeah. And I just wanted you to also know, just on that note, the school bus manufacturers understand the possibilities in this area for school buses to serve as basically a backup generator, right? So
yes, they do. They already have bidirectional going on. We know that. We've been in communication with them, and we appreciate it. And they have big batteries that would be very useful for our community.
Yes, if the CPUC is interested in this as an avenue for looking at energy security as well. So thank you. And like I said, tell all your friends to tell us.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Heather. And thank you, Beverly.
Next up, we have Jamie Levin. Jamie, I have unmuted your mic.
Hey, thanks. Hey, Jason, I raised this last week's call. The Hydrogen Hub program from DOE, which is, $8 billion program. And I know California is focused on this. There's legislation in the state Senate being introduced to make commitments to the state's competitive position to secure one of the hubs that could be funded anywhere from $500 million to $1 billion. So I guess what I'm asking is there discussion amongst CARB staff, and I would think also tied to members of the legislature and what the legislature wants to do, and the governor's office, to leveraging some of this money to help cost share the federal government funds.
Well, thanks for bringing that up again, Jamie. It's good to keep that front and center. I do believe those discussions are taking place internally, but again, as was mentioned before, please do keep bringing this forward to make sure it does stay front and center in the discussion, and we'll provide you updates as we know more on what's going on there.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear it's going to be a combination of private industry cost share, but the state of California is a leader, certainly in the transportation sector. And the hydrogen hubs are going to be looking at offtakes, not just for transportation purposes, but also for industrial heat and power. I mean, they're agricultural applications, but I think California is in the very best position because of all the work you guys have done in CEC in the direction of transportation. And I think what we want to be able to show is that we can produce and use large quantities of green hydrogen as part of the total, program to reduce global warming. So I will keep bringing it up. That $8 billion is there, and California should get a good share of it.
Definitely. Thank you, Jamie.
Next up, we have Andrew Mercer. Andrew, I have unmuted your mic. Andrew, you'll need to unmute on your end as well.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, good. Okay, finally. No, I had the last one. I just had a real problem. I couldn't get it on my, anyway, long story. Anyway, this is, I got to say, it's a little frustrating. I have been in contact with CARB. We've got 6 executive orders, mostly in passenger cars and light trucks, diesel and gasoline. And we had tested with big rigs, 2 long hauls, and we couldn't test the emissions on them, but our device that we have also helps with the fuel mileage and the performance of the vehicle on the torque side. And so and the 2 long hauls did extremely well on the fuel saving side, and they said the performance was incredible. We've tested with Walmart, we've tested with Schneider, and they loved it. However, the heavy duty engine manufacturers, Cummins amongst them, tell them take it off or we'll negate your warranties. So we are now in conference with UCR for testing on heavy duty on the emission side and the fuel saving side, and all aspects of our device. It's a simple to install unit. Works with the onboard computer. We've proved without a shadow of a doubt that we reduce emissions on passenger cars and light trucks. And my problem is when I talk to everybody about the possible grant from California Air Resources Board, because I know you're trying to eliminate emissions and you know you're not going to get rid of heavy duty diesel overnight. They're not all going to convert to battery powered trucks tomorrow. And I get the impression that it's not an urgent thing to reduce the emissions because it takes 4 months, up to 4 months to approve an application for a grant. And then I was told that it takes another year before it gets funded. And I don't understand that at all. Everybody I deal with at California Air Resources Board has been wonderful. The problem is the rush to get this stuff done. If we proved it with passenger cars and light trucks, at least we have a track record of actually doing it. We're not just coming in fresh and saying, oh yeah, well, we made this device and you guys should try it. This is something that we've done, 6 executive orders from Air Resources Board. So what do we do to get something done? I don't want to wait I don't want to wait 16 months to find out whether I'm going to get a grant or not. And we've spent over $150,000 using a CARB tested facility. We bought a heavy duty engine, ran perfectly. We took it to the testing facility, the only one in Southern California. I think there might have been one in Northern California, but the only other one we knew about was in Texas. And they said, oh yeah, we do all that. So we take it in there, we get the engine there. Then the technician doesn't have the right software. He's got to send away for it. He doesn't know when he's going to get it. A month later, he finally gets it, but then all of a sudden he's on vacation. He can't come in until he gets back from vacation. Well, how long is his vacation? I don't know. Then he gets back and it's the wrong software, so he has to send for it again. It never happened.
I just want to pause for a second. I hear what you're saying and hear your frustration. But I think part of what you're bringing up might be better for us to discuss one-on-one with you, since it is a little specific to your experience, and we want to make sure that you're getting the help that you need. But we do also want to make sure that we're moving today's work group along and keeping the subject matter on the topics at hand, so that all the participants who are on today can have a chance to ask their questions as well.
Okay. Andrea, that's fine. However, I just want to say that I have talked with your guys, and that's what I've got was the 16-month kind of possibility that would take place. So anyway, I'll sign off from there and go ahead.
Thank you. So with that, I think that we're at about the time we had to cover the long-term heavy-duty investment strategy. So let's go ahead and move on to the next topic, which is on proposed allocations. And Jason, if I can ask you to scroll down the agenda to the second page so that we get to the table with allocations, that would be great. Thank you. All right, so moving on to the discussion. Oh, and before we get into that as well, I saw a number of questions in the chat about slides for today. So we don't actually have slides for today's work group. We are sharing the agenda for today on the screen, and a link to that agenda was sent out in the chat. This really is intended to be an avenue for us to receive feedback on these high-level initial proposals that we're sharing today. So we'd like to encourage an open conversation on this as well. Moving into allocations, the governor's proposed budget bill builds on the multi-year investments that were included in the 2021 zero emission vehicle acceleration package. And in total, this year's proposal and the 2021 zero emission vehicle acceleration package provide $10 billion for equitable zero emission vehicle transportation over the next 5 years for the California Air Resources Board, the California Energy Commission, California State Transportation Agency, and the Governor's Office of Economic Business and Development. The multi-year proposal envisions over $2 billion for CARB to support incentives for heavy-duty vehicles and off-road equipment, with additional funding to CEC to support complementary infrastructure. The proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year includes robust funding for heavy-duty vehicles and off-road equipment, with a total of $918.64 million for this category. This includes dedicated investments for key vehicle types, with $75 million for zero-emission drayage trucks, $135 million for zero-emission school buses, and $70 million for zero-emission transit buses. And we anticipate continuing to offer set-asides for these vehicle classes through HVIP. Additionally, this year, the budget includes $10 million to CARB for emerging opportunities to support demonstration and pilot projects in high carbon emitting sectors, such as maritime, aviation, rail, and other off-road applications. While the proposed budget specifies how certain investments must be spent, as I just described, we have discretion on how to invest the remaining $628.64 million between our heavy-duty vehicle and off-road equipment investments. Staff's initial thoughts on how to split the remaining funds is shown on the second page of the meeting agenda and on the screen here. So we're considering allocating between $200 and $270 million to HVIP standard, with additional funds included for zero emission transit, zero emission public school buses, and zero emission drayage in line with the governor's proposed budget. Additionally, we are considering providing continued support to the innovative small e-fleets pilot within HVIP, with between $25 to $35 million. This pilot within HVIP provides incentives for zero emission trucks geared towards small fleets and independent owner operators. For our clean off-road equipment voucher incentive program, known as CORE, we're considering an allocation of between $200 and $250 million. This recognizes the popularity of this incentive program and the growing demand for zero emission equipment in the off-road sector. For demonstration and pilot projects, we are considering allocating between $40 and $75 million, including the $10 million investment for emerging opportunities. We will discuss the types of demonstration and pilot projects under considerations for this year later today. And finally, we are considering allocating $28.64 million from the Air Quality Improvement Fund towards truck loan assistance. We will discuss how the existing truck loan assistance program, which has received the bulk of the air quality improvement funds in recent years, might be better adapted to support zero emission vehicles. So these proposed ranges are really intended to provide our initial thoughts on what reasonable funding scenarios could look like for our heavy duty allocations. While we recognize that the demand is great in each of these categories, we will of course have to be sure that our final allocations equal the amount of funding provided in the final budget. This means we won't be able to use the high end of all of the allocations as shown on the table. As we decide on exact allocations, we will evaluate demand within HVIP and CORE as those programs reopen this year. And we're also looking at feedback that we received from stakeholders like you today and throughout the next few months. So some questions for stakeholders today about the funding ranges. Are we focusing in on the right areas? Are there different projects or concepts we should support? Are the ranges provided reasonable? Or do you think the need in some project categories are higher or lower than what we're estimating? With that, I'll open it up for comments and feedback. Aria?
Thank you. We already have raised hands. As a reminder, I will ask speakers to say their name and affiliation. With that, first up, we have Santosh Alexander. Santosh, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you. I'm with a company called WideSense, and I posted a question earlier in the question box, but I'll just repeat it here. Now, is there any consideration for technologies for optimization of zero emission heavy duty fleets? In our discussions with transit fleets and delivery fleets deploying battery electric vehicles, they say that current electric vehicle fleet operation KPIs, the key performance indicators like miles per vehicle, is very low, and the cost per mile is higher than necessary. And they would very much need technologies for planning, scheduling, charging, and dispatch optimization. So is there any consideration for, such technologies in your current program offerings? No?
Yeah, so that's a really great question and a great comment for us to be thinking about. I would say in general, most of our incentive programs really focus on the vehicle themselves and not necessarily so much the charging infrastructure or supporting technologies that help optimize charging and similar things. So that's something that we can certainly consider as we're thinking about our programs this year. And I know that our partners at the California Energy Commission also are looking at infrastructure investments and ways that we can be optimizing investments there. So thank you for bringing that up. That is an important point in consideration as we continue to advance zero emission technologies and the state's energy goals as a whole.
Yeah, and just to add to that, if you don't mind, in a few seconds, I think for fleets, there's one part of their transition is driven by regulation and these type of funds that you're offering them to acquire the vehicles, but the operating expenses of the fleet that they have to bear. So these type of optimization technologies help the fleet in lowering their operating costs, and as a result, the transition to zero emission fleets will be accelerated. No, so just a comment there. Thank you very much. No,
thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we have Parth Ruparel. Parth, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you. My name is Parth. I'm from Conmet, who is making eHub solutions for trailers and converting them to ETRU trailers. My question is, for the demonstration and pilot projects, do we have, and maybe you might have brought this up before, I joined a bit late, is there like a procedure that we can follow, something that I can read through on how to introduce and demonstrate our product out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're in the right place. So today we're really starting the conversation on the types of demonstration and pilot projects that we might, that we should be considering to fund for the upcoming fiscal year. So a little later on today, one of my colleagues will be jumping into that discussion in a lot greater detail. So encourage you to join in that conversation and keep an eye out for any future work group meetings on that topic.
Okay. Just one more question for the core voucher. I think a few days ago we had another workshop, if you remember, and we discussed about $165 million that were planned to be directed towards this. Is this now changing to 200 to 250?
Todd, would you like to jump in?
Parth, that's a great question. So really, we're looking at this meeting's looking even more forward than that meeting last week. So like a month ago, we had a work group meeting talking about the 21-22 funds, and that's about $165 million split into 10 different funds we talked about. This is for the next year. So we're looking even more forward than that. So we'll be kicking. So we're looking for ideas and, you know, how we can make the program better, things like that. And so that's why in the table that's being shown right now, it's this big range. We're trying to figure out, you know, upper management trying to figure out how we want to distribute these funds, looking for folks' input on how we can spend these funds the best way. So that's where we're at, Parth.
Got it. Okay, thanks a lot, Todd. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Next up, we have Ryan Lau. Ryan, I have unmuted your mic.
Hello, Ryan Lau, External Affairs Representative from AC Transit. I think the question, and I just want to make sure that I understood correctly, there's some discretionary funding that you can sort of move around in future years. And what I would say is, I think it would be valuable to maybe enhance the transit portion. And there's a couple reasons for that. I think, you know, CARB routinely refers to public transit as a beachhead for zero emission technology because we're sort of early adopters. We currently have the ICT role. And so we're sort of aggressively working toward transitioning our fleets. And, you know, we're, as a result, helping to build that market and signal to OEMs that there really is a market out there. But also, like I mentioned, we've had a mandate on the books for a few years now. And we also have to move in that direction a little bit more quickly than I think maybe is obvious sometimes, because I think I've seen in several presentations that trucks and buses have to move to zero emission by 2045, which is technically correct. But our deadline, public transit, is actually 2040. So we actually have to get to that end goal 5 years before you know, the rest of the fleets. And so I do think sort of enhancing that line item, that pot of funding would be very valuable. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Next up, we have Adam Browning. Adam, I have unmuted your mic.
Hey, thank you so much. In a similar vein here, I would just like to put in a plug for prioritizing drayage in that, unlike the other fleets here, drayage is not allowed to transfer, roll off through natural attrition, but in fact has a much more accelerated time schedule. The ports of LA and Long Beach, where 40% of our nation's goods flow through, this December, end of December, around 6,000 trucks in each of those ports will roll off the drayage registry because their engines are no longer compliant and will not be allowed into the trucks. So that's about a third of the drayage trucks in each of those ports. Currently, the funding to replace those with ZEVs is woefully insufficient. Despite your wonderful efforts, we really do also appreciate the focus on the Innovative Small Fleets program, which is designed to specifically address the nearly 75% of the fleet that are independent small owner operators. However, that 25 million will roll out to between 166 or 80 trucks, depending on how you administer it, which is just a far cry short of the 6,000 trucks per port that are going to be necessary. So would highly encourage a repositioning of funding to really address the acute needs of the drayage fleet, which serves such a critical part of not only our state, but our country's movement of heavy duty goods. And again, this isn't going to be transitioned through normal attrition. About a third of the fleet is being, of the current diesel fleet is being, will be blocked at the end of this year. So in 10 short months from now. So once again, the sum total of the comment here is that we need a reprioritization of funding to where it's needed most and needed soonest. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Next up, we have Dan Cha. Dan, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, thank you so much, Dan Cha, representing Arrival. Just a question clarifying the HVIP standard line. Is staff assuming implementation of the fleet cap that was adopted in the last funding plan? Is that 200 million sort of, is that assumption built into, and for others edification, starting next year, fleets with 100 or more vehicles can only purchase fuel cells, and then that cap drops to 50 in 2024, and of course correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm just curious if that was built into your HVIP standard allocation.
Hi, Dan. So yes, that assumption that the fleet size limit of 100 trucks for an eligibility requirement for HVIP was built in when we were estimating demands and providing these draft allocations.
Got it. Thank you. And so in a similar vein, then, does that number anticipate availability of fuel cells that would be only available for purchase by large fleets starting next year?
So we are we do anticipate that this would be about what we would need to cover HVIP demand for the upcoming year with the fleet size limit in effect. So that would include the fuel cell exemption from the fleet size limit. But again, the fuel cells are temporarily exempted from the fleet size limit until they achieve greater market penetration. But we will be very closely monitoring what the demand is in HVIP as it reopens this year, and waiting for additional signals as we watch the market and gain more information on what types of vehicles, fuel cell or otherwise, may become HVIP eligible in the coming fiscal year.
Got it. My last follow-up is, and I probably should know this, but are there any fuel cell Class 8 or otherwise trucks or tractors currently available, commercially available and approved under HVIP?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Currently, there are no Class 8 trucks, fuel cell trucks that are eligible for HVIP. There are 4 Class 8 fuel cell buses that are eligible within HVIP.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Next up, we have Michael Pimentel. Michael, I've unmuted your mic. Michael, we're unable to hear you.
All right. Good afternoon.
There we go.
I'm Michael Pimentel, Executive Director of the California Transit Association, representing 85 transit and rail agencies in the state of California. I do want to just echo the comments offered by Ryan at AC Transit and elevate the needs of California's public transit agencies within these early discussions on proposed HVIP funding allocations. And I just want to present that this current fiscal year will be telling for the demand for zero emission transit bus vouchers. We are in the year directly prior to the start of the Innovative Clean Transit Regulations purchase mandate on large agencies. And we're also in a period of improving financial pictures for transit agencies in this maybe burgeoning post-pandemic world. And so with that, I think it would be important that as ARB is further refining these estimates, that we are looking to the demand in this current fiscal year know that there is going to be an allocation that is open for voucher requests on the 30th, and that may provide some substantiation, some justification for improving upon what is noted here as really the statutory baseline of the $70 million. The other thing I do want to put on the table for consideration, and this is, I think, still very much early thinking on my part and behalf of my members, and that's that we ought to find a way to create some additional flexibility within the HVIP program for allowing agencies to access these vouchers once that purchase mandate goes into effect. Under the current structure of HVIP, funds cannot be used to meet regulatory compliance requirements, but I do want to just reflect on the reality that agencies, as we agreed to the Innovative Clean Transit regulation, we're under the assumption that there would be a lead time for them to take early action. 2 years of the 4 years of proposed early action were pandemic tinged, and that prevented a lot of agencies from moving forward with alacrity to purchase zero emission buses. And so I think that at least in the very near term, there ought to be some reconsideration from ARB to provide some additional flexibility for the use of these dollars to meet the ICT requirements. And I know that that is going to be a possibly significant policy discussion that would have to be had. However, I think that with the structure of the ICT being what it was, which again did encourage early action, but that had not contemplated a pandemic, nor the significant gutting of transit agency finances over these last 2 years, some additional flexibility may be warranted. So thank you for your time. Of course, we'll follow up with the team on the ARBs and discuss this concept further. But I think that will be something that certainly we as an association will pursue in the coming weeks and months. So thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And really a great point again about HVIP reopening on March 30th, and that we anticipate that will really help guide our investments further. So that is definitely a data point that we at CARB will be looking at very closely as we further consider allocations and this upcoming year's funding plan. Aria, I think we have time for one more question and then we'll need to move on to the next agenda topic.
Okay, next up we have Howard Schiebler. Howard, I've unmuted your mic.
Okay, great. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I'm Howard Schiebler. I'm the president at Crossroads Equipment Finance. We're the largest CalCap lender in the state of California. And so we've provided financing to thousands of independent owner operators and small businesses. Thanks to that program, it's, I think, worked marvelously to help with a lot of the upgrade of the fleet in California. And my question is, how can Crossroads and others participate in the dialogue properly to combine programs like CalCap, grants, and any other forms of financial support that you're trying to allocate dollars towards to help move the drayage Class 8 and also general Class 8 vehicles in advance of them coming online for mass production. I think a lot of these operators that are buying $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 trucks to run in and out of the ports, maybe even more expensive today with the way used truck prices are. But these electric trucks are going to be $300,000 to $400,000. And I think it's going to take a combination of those things in order to help drive that being an economically viable alternative. And I'm trying to figure out, I've been involved in lots of discussions like this, but it feels fragmented, and I'm wondering if how I can best participate to support the efforts to try and figure out how to best allocate dollars, because I think we have a lot of experience to add into the discussion, both on a finance side and as well as the fact that we're the largest Freightliner truck dealership group in California.
Yeah, that's that's a great question. And I think it actually ties in very nicely to the next item that we have on the agenda. So I'll ask Eric Patton and Danielle Lawrence, who are leading efforts on our financing assistance program, to chime in here.
Hi, Howard. Thanks for the comment. Yeah, we know that Crossroads is one of the participating lenders in the truck loan program. So, and we've been working with participating lenders, trying to figure a way to get more zero emission vehicle loans into the program. So we, if you have any suggestions as to ways we can make the program more amenable to zero emission loans, we'll welcome any feedback you have. Actually, the loan program does allow for zero emission vehicles now. But yes, we're hoping to use that more as a vehicle for more zero emission loans and to meet the requirements of SB 372.
Yeah, and actually in the next section, Eric's going to be talking about an upcoming work group that we plan to hold to talk more about the loan program and what we're going to do with the money that's there or that we're proposing in that space.
So given that this is a pretty natural transition, I'm going to suggest that we go ahead and move on. So Eric, let's dive right in.
All right, so let's give a little background on the loan program. So CARB's Truck Loan Assistance Program was launched in 2009. The program utilizes AQUIP funds to help small business fleet owners affected by the new truck and bus regulation that fall below conventional lending criteria to secure financing for upgrading their fleets with newer trucks. As of March 2022, this program has successfully expended over $195 million in funding to provide over $2.4 billion in financing to small business truckers for approximately 36,000 loans. Program demand currently remains steady with over 4,000 loans enrolled per year since 2018 and a loan enrollment of approximately 4,700 loans in calendar year 2021. As 2023 approaches, the model year schedule of the truck and bus regulation will be fully implemented, and 2010 or newer engines will be required except for limited exemptions. We want to continue to support small fleets that need assistance complying with the truck and bus regulation, while simultaneously shifting support to small fleets seeking zero emission trucks that will meet the state's future goals. California is quickly moving towards zero emission vehicles. As we make the transition to meet the state's zero emission goals, additional funding will be needed to support financing of zero emission heavy duty vehicles. CARB and the California Pollution Control Financing Authority, CPCFA, have been holding discussions with lenders over the past year on how to encourage more purchases and lending for zero emission vehicles. Zero emission vehicles are currently eligible under the truck loan program, but we know that fleets need more assistance transitioning to zero emission. CARB and CPCFA are collaborating with the CEC to determine how we could expand the traditional truck loan program to finance zero emission vehicles and infrastructure. CEC recently posted a request for information on potential medium duty, heavy duty charging and infrastructure loan program and proposed medium duty and heavy duty infrastructure loans at a concepts workshop last month. CARB proposes to allocate $28.64 million to the truck loan assistance to truck loan assistance, with a portion of the funding going to the existing truck loan assistance program, and a portion of the funding going toward a new ZE truck loan pilot program. The pilot would help CARB, CPCFA, CEC, and the lenders to learn from fleets what is needed to make a successful transition to zero emission. The pilot will draw on the programmatic aspects that have worked in the current loan program, where funds are set aside based on a percentage of each enrolled loan amount into participating lenders' loan loss reserve accounts to cover potential losses resulting from loan defaults. The interest rate in the current program is capped at 20%. We are planning a workshop on May 20th to discuss the truck loan assistance program and the concepts for a new ZE truck loan pilot to help inform the funding plan discussion. 2 questions on which staff would like input include: what should we consider in deciding the funding allocation for the pilot? We are looking at demand and what we expect for 2023 and how much we have spent so far on the truck loan program. Does anyone have any feedback on what we should consider in setting the pilot amount? Any fleet type is eligible for the truck loan assistance program. Are there unique factors of the different trucking sectors that we should consider in designing a ZE truck loan pilot? We can discuss this today, and we will discuss this more in detail on the workshop in May. If there are any lenders on the call, we would like to your feedback today, and we will be holding a lender roundtable with CPCFA to discuss how the pilot could look for participating lenders. The truck loan assistance program and the ZE truck loan assistance pilot will fit within the umbrella of another effort for that CARB is working on, SB 372. We know these programs aren't going to be a solution for everyone. This is just one piece of the portfolio we are of support for small fleets through SB 372. I will turn it over to Danielle Lawrence to discuss SB 372. Danielle?
Thanks, Eric. So SB 372 was approved late last year by the governor, and the bill directs CARB and CPCFA to develop and administer a program to make financing tools and supports available to the owners of medium and heavy duty fleets to enable them to fully transition their fleets to zero emission vehicles. This program is referred to as the Medium and Heavy Duty Zero Emission Vehicle Fleet Purchasing Assistance Program. The bill identifies a wide variety of elements that are necessary to assist fleets of different sizes and sectors in their transition to zero emission vehicles, such as financial supports that are targeted towards underserved communities, non-financial supports such as technical support, an outreach and marketing campaign, stakeholder feedback, metrics to determine the program's success, and also coordination and alignment with partnering state agencies such as CPCFA, the Public Utilities Commission, and also the California Energy Commission. The bill specifies that CARB may allocate funding from, but not limited to, the Air Quality Improvement Fund, or AQIP, the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, or GGRF, and or the General Fund. CARB and other state agencies already have many activities that are underway that support the goals of this program. One example is the existing truck loan assistance program and the new ZE truck loan pilot that Eric covered. We know there's a lot more that can be done to support medium and heavy duty fleets transitioning to zero emission, and we know that we need to get a lot of stakeholder feedback on what those supports will be. We're listening and learning from small fleet owners and community advocates that already have shared with us. We're building connections with stakeholders in the priority populations and communities and making the most of the clean truck efforts that are already underway, such as the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation. We extend the invitation for you to reach out to us directly and make us aware of people you know that need to be included in this discussion. In June, we will begin coordinating stakeholder engagement effort to discuss SB 372 and truck transitioning strategies in more detail. This could include listening sessions, community meetings, and individual meetings with stakeholders to get feedback on design and inform the SB 372 effort. So what are the next steps and how can you be more involved in this process? So first, we must focus on the funding plan process and determine the allocation towards the truck loan assistance program and the ZE truck loan pilot for the fiscal year 22-23 funding plan. As Eric mentioned, on May 4th, we'll be holding a truck loan program specific work group to discuss the details of the truck loan assistance program, the new ZE truck loan pilot, and funding plan allocations. The broader discussion and stakeholder engagement effort on SB 372, combined with some of our other CARB programs, will kick off at the beginning of June. Over several months, we plan to hold group and individual meetings with stakeholders to get input and feedback. So for our discussion today on the truck loan assistance program and new ZE truck loan pilot, I'm going to recap some of those questions that Eric had proposed for the group. So number one was, what should we consider in deciding the funding allocation for the ZE truck loan pilot? And then also, are there unique factors of the different trucking sectors that should be considered in designing the new ZE truck loan pilot? And then also any other questions or comments you have at this point, we will open it up for both of the previous sections that we covered. So I'll pass it over to Aria for questions and comments.
Thanks, Danielle. We already have several people with their hands raised, so let's get to it. Dave Cook, I have unmuted your mic. Dave, there you go.
Hello, yes, I was going to comment on the distribution of the funds from the last topic, so I'll wait until the demonstrations and pilots come up and I'll comment then.
Thanks, Dave. Next up, we have Brett Stevens. Brett, I have unmuted your mic.
I'm in the same boat as Dave. A lot of commentary on the medium heavy duty funding models, and similarly not on the loan assistance program. So I can wait as well.
Thank you, Brett. Next up, we have Nico. Nico, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Nico Balcom with the California Fuel Cell Partnership. Although I do have additional comments, like the previous two gentlemen, I'll hold those till the end, but I had a question on this item specifically. For the truck loan program, does that include strong considerations of used truck loans? Because the majority of the drayage trucks operational, and I think that was hinted at earlier as well, that there is a challenge there of the drayage truck fleet are used trucks. They're not new trucks, and that's creates an even bigger challenge with regard to the implementation of zero emission trucks.
Yes, used trucks can be purchased through the loan program. Of course, with zero emission, you know, they're all going to be essentially new starting out.
Yeah, my concern is the incremental, the delta is even larger than from a new truck to a new truck, so to say, between conventional technology to zero emission vehicle technology, because now you're starting off at a cost that is more typical to a used truck, which is significantly lower than a new truck. Just want to make sure you're not running out of funds too soon, basically.
Yeah, that's what one we're wanting to get feedback on. What how can we do the loan program? How can we do loans with zero emission vehicles that of course going to have much higher capital costs, and then we have we'll also have the infrastructure to, we'll have to figure out a way to make that work too. So we're open to any feedback on that, if anybody has available. But we're planning, as I indicated, we're also working with CEC to figure out how to support infrastructure and also the vehicle purchase too.
Okay, thank you. Just want to make sure I bring that up.
Thank you, Nico. Next up, we have Matt Schrapp. Matt, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, thank you. Matt Schrapp with the Harbor Trucking Association. I do have some questions on this loan program. First question is, Eric, you alluded to the fact that this allocation would be split between the SB 372 and then the truck loan assistance program. Did I misunderstand that? Essentially, I'm wondering what is the amount that will be dedicated to the current truck loan assistance program and what amount then would be, I guess, allocated or cordoned off for SB 372 is my first question.
Yeah, that's one thing we're asking for feedback on. Because we need to continue to support the regular loan program, of course. We can't just drop, just make a sudden change all of a sudden. But still, we want to try and we want to get zero emission vehicles in the program, and we have to support SB 372 at the same time too.
Okay, and let me get this straight. You guys have an SB 372 fleet purchasing assistance program as well as a zero emission truck loan pilot, two separate efforts?
Well, a ZE pilot is our idea for still continuing the truck loan program, but then transitioning to meeting the requirements of SB 372.
I can add in to this also.
yeah.
SB 372 is more of like the overarching program.
Okay.
And so mixing financial and non-financial supports to support fleets in their transition to zero emission. So one avenue that we could explore more of how we can transition the truck loan program to funding more zero emission vehicles is the ZE loan pilot. So that will be within the umbrella of the truck loan program, which is also within the umbrella of SB 372.
Lots of umbrellas.
Yes,
Okay,
there's lots of umbrellas here. Good thing it's
Yes.
not raining, but
We need the rain. No, we need the rain. Okay, so
Yeah.
not to digress here, and I know that everybody has a lot of questions, I'm sure. But I guess if you're asking people on this call for what the allocation amounts should be between the two, that's the existing truck loan program and then this zero emission truck loan pilot, I would say that at least 75 to 80% of the funds should be going to the existing loan program. And that's because, as it was alluded to by my colleague Nico and was also echoed here by staff, that program has the ability to fund used vehicles, diesel, auto gas, natural gas, electric, hydrogen, or otherwise. It is a program that works and that can be used to, I guess, build a foundation, operationally speaking, for the zero emission truck loan pilot program. But, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, where there's only $28 million. So I think that my lender colleagues and sponsor members of our organization who are in banking, who are official CalCap lenders, would agree. Some would probably say 100%, while the technology still matures in the marketplace. The current truck loan program is critical to assisting small fleets, that being 10 or fewer in this particular program, with meeting the upcoming in-use on-road truck and bus rule standards. So I understand that we need to get SB 372 off the ground, and the zero emission truck loan pilot is important to begin, but I don't, there's zero small fleets that have taken out a loan for a zero emissions vehicle. I can pretty much guarantee that at this point in time. So I know we want to encourage participation, but it can't be at the expense, especially during this critical time leading up to the legacy rule being fully implemented, that being the on-road truck and bus rule. So, I mean, that's a suggestion, I guess. I wonder where ARB, if you've already made up your mind about what that percentage allocation is. And again, SB 372 and this zero emission truck loan pilot is important, but we need to think about the needs today, right now. This is the only program that can really be deployed immediately, that doesn't have a long drawn out application process or anything to that effect.
Yeah, and I will say that we are definitely taking that into consideration when we're looking at the split between the existing truck loan assistance program and the ZE truck loan pilot. That we know that fleets are, coming upon their final deadline of the truck and bus reg, and even if they aren't right on track with the final deadline, then throughout the next year, we need to make sure that we have funds available for the truck loan program. So we will be talking about this in more detail also, and have some numbers to present on past years of the truck loan assistance program that we can discuss at the workshop on May 4th that's dedicated to this topic as well.
Okay.
So we can get into more details on that.
Great, and I won't belabor this. You mentioned, so I mean, because especially SB 372 can draw from AQIP, GGRF, or the general fund, there's more sources of funding where traditionally AQIP has been the sole source of revenue for the truck loan assistance program. So it's important that we recognize that program and really utilize it to build out whatever this zero emission truck loan pilot is. And just last 2 points, one question, one commentary, I guess. Although we're going into HVIP later, I think that it is folly to create the fleet participation caps of 100 and then 50, especially if we talk about secondary market for used vehicles. And if SB 372 can fund used vehicles, that's great, but there aren't any used electric trucks, yet alone hydrogen vehicles in the marketplace. How used vehicles come into the marketplace is large fleets purchase them, run them through a capital recovery period, and then put them into the secondary marketplace. So limiting fleets from participating in HVIP by fleet size is completely against seeding the secondary market. And if we want to try to encourage the secondary market, then we need to encourage larger fleets to go and procure equipment that they will eventually deploy into the secondary marketplace. That is absolutely critical. And I'll save my further comments on HVIP until later. But if you could just, one last thing, explain to me what under the SB 372, what these non-financial mechanisms are that you're thinking about. One, you said part of it'll be, financial money, and then there'll be non-financial. I'm trying to understand what that means exactly. And I will stop there.
Well, thank you for your comments. They are helpful. So in terms of non-financial supports, the main one that the bill calls out repeatedly is technical assistance. And so we know that we want to provide some sort of technical assistance to fleets that are making the transition, especially when we're looking at smaller fleets or fleets in underserved communities. So part of it is we're going to be looking to fleets for what do they need in order to make this transition, and what do they need from us in order to support them. A lot of fleets have said, even if we're able to give them a truck, they still need other supports, just in terms of infrastructure and charging and, other things that in terms of managing their fleet. the fleet itself. So
Okay.
it could be a variety of different things. Also making sure that we have resources available is another big one. But we'll be talking about this more and more about what else will be included in the non-financial supports.
Right. And all those things cost money.
Mhm.
So,
Yes, they
I mean,
do.
what fleets need is infrastructure support. And
Mhm.
whether there's going to be some state of California fueling depot somewhere, I guess remains to be seen, because as I've mentioned several times, that fleets typically around the harbor, especially, don't own the property that they're working off of.
Mhm.
And that is a major hurdle towards infrastructure implementation. The infrastructure is being installed in like the Inland Empire. And with current ranges under existing battery electric technology, at least, it makes it challenging. There's a tremendous amount of range anxiety still. So looking forward to further discussions, and thank you for the response.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Next up, we have Lauren Navarro. Lauren, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you. This is Leela Rao with Environmental Defense Fund. We were the sponsors of SB 372, which I can assure you the goal was to get more money available for trucks, not less money, Matt. So I think the goal here is to have more money available in general by having the ability to really leverage the private market to bring in more funds. And so I don't want us to think about this as being sort of truck and bus rule versus SB 372. I think both programs are needed and necessary, and we want to grow the ZEV market to meet the goals of California, including the ACT, which is already regulation, and the ACF, or the Advanced Clean Fleets Rule, which is coming up, which definitely fleets will need to purchase ACF. Will definitely need to purchase ZEV trucks. So let's make sure that both of these can move together. And on that sense, I just wanted to say, Carb, I think that your plan around SB 372 sounds like a good one, especially your plan to have further outreach and meetings with sort of affected stakeholders, disadvantaged communities, the fleets, certainly. I think it sounds like you're already starting to have those meetings, but we'll go more sort of gung-ho in June. I also wanted to share another thing about SB 372, which is that it can fund sort of used vehicles, and that one of the goals or one of the abilities CARB has under SB 372 is really to help support residual value and foster secondary markets. So I hope that's something that people are thinking about as something that can help to solve some of these problems out there with making sure that drayage is available, for instance. And on that, I would like to support the comments that other people have made about focusing on drayage in this proceeding, including my colleague Adam Browning. So thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. Keep working on it and keep involving us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. We only have time for one more question, and Glenn Cho, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you. Glenn Cho from Toyota Motors North America. I had a question on the purchasing. Does it also include leasing allowed under this program?
Yeah, leases are allowed in the truck loan program currently.
And then also with regard to infrastructure, I believe you mentioned that the zero emission infrastructure will be eligible for this under SB 372.
So at this point, the infrastructure piece is not included, but we are coordinating with CEC on how we can have an infrastructure piece included in our new ZE loan pilot. And also in, I guess, the future of the program, how infrastructure could also be funded under the truck loan program.
That's great, and really hope that once you do that, that you would expand the eligibility to include for example, the truck stops and also the non-fleet operators to be involved in the infrastructure rollout and have access to funds to pay for these costly infrastructure. And the last thing I'll make a comment is, we're hoping that SB 372 is not limited to the small fleets. What we do recognize is that the larger fleets are the ones who have these vehicles on the road first, and giving them access, whether it's leasing or purchase, but allowing them to turn around and put these zero emission vehicles into the market to allow the secondary market to take hold is critical. So we would recommend, don't restrict this solely to the smaller fleets. Instead, maybe even invite the larger fleets to participate and then put the trucks on the road. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, the bill is broad in that it does, it does have focus groups in terms of small fleets and specifically underserved communities, but it doesn't eliminate large fleets.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Danielle and Eric. So next we'll be moving on to our advanced technology demonstration and pilot project. So I'd like to introduce Earl Lamberg.
Thank you, Andrea. Again, my name is Earl Lamberg, and I'm CARB's lead staff for advanced technology demonstration and pilot projects. Since the program's inception back in 2009, CARB has funded well over $400 million in projects that represent over 40 separate projects, ranging from locomotives, Harborcraft, cargo handling equipment, yard trucks, zero emission on-road trucks, transit buses, school buses, panel vans, and innovative infrastructure solutions, including on-site hydrogen production, battery storage systems supported by solar, and a multitude of EVSE installs. First, a moment about eligibility and the application process. Individual companies that are interested in applying for funding must team with an eligible applicant to submit their application to CARB. Eligible applicants are either California-based public entities or nonprofits with experience in implementing demonstration and pilot projects. CARB also requires some form of financial match commitment from applicants, which is typically a one-to-one match, and normally our projects are required to be located in disadvantaged communities as determined by Cal Enviroscreen 4.0. All funded demonstration and pilot projects are required to have a practical field demonstration that must take place in California for at least a majority of the time during this data collection period. Only emission reductions that occur in California can count toward the benefit from the project, and that is a scoring criteria as well. Additional requirements may be overlaid by the state legislature as they are considering the budget for fiscal year 2022-23, such as a freight focus or a restriction on automation. I want to be clear today that we're going to be talking about fiscal year 2022-23 funding, but we are also in the middle of the solicitation development process for fiscal year 21-22 funding, or last year's funding. That solicitation process is also looking for a third-party administrator to help CARB implement demonstration and pilot projects. With that said, it is the intent to have projects selected for funding by fiscal year 2022-23 funding to be administered by CARB's third-party demonstration and pilot administrator as well. That administrator has not been selected yet, but the solicitation for that opportunity, as well as the $40 million in fiscal year 21-22 funding that was approved by our board in November, will be released mid-spring with a recruit meeting for those opportunities later in April. If you're interested in the third-party administrator opportunity, please reach out to me to discuss. Being the third-party administrator comes with lots of opportunities. The third-party administrator will be in the data stream for all of our demonstration and pilot projects selected from last year's funding and this year's funding as well, and may take over existing projects being administered by CARB and will be part of our solicitation development process going forward. I think of the third-party administrator as being in a long-term relationship with CARB going forward. Again, let me know if you're interested by reaching out to me after this meeting so we can discuss. Turning back to fiscal year 2022-23 funding proposal, we are about to discuss the proposed categories for funding for fiscal year 22-23. And as you know, none of this is set in stone. Specific categories or funding amounts may change over time and will comply with the final budget signed by the governor later in the summer. CARB uses the terms demonstration and pilots together very often, but to CARB, they have very different meanings. The demonstration projects are pre-commercial. Technologies do not have CARB or US EPA certification, and typically vehicles and equipment at the end of the project go back to the manufacturer. Pilot projects are focused on commercialized technologies, have the needed CARB and US EPA certification, and ownership of the vehicles and equipment is transferred to the end user at the start of the project and remain in service after the term of the project. A quick note on project timelines. Assuming that the budget is passed on time, we will be holding a workshop on the allocation of funding this summer with board consideration of our plan this fall. Work group meetings to develop a solicitation requirements for demonstration and pilot projects will be in early 2023 with a solicitation release in the spring of 2023 with the goal of selecting a project for funding by October and grant agreements being in place by the start of 2024 with projects concluding no later than the first quarter of 2028. As CARB has done with its past two funding cycles, we will coordinate with CEC about funding opportunities with infrastructure components, and we will try and align our solicitations to synergistically build on each other's efforts and take advantage of our individual strengths with CARB's focus on vehicles and equipment and CEC's focus on infrastructure. As we go through the project categories, we'll stop at the end of the demo and pilot section to address questions and any comments about what I'm about ready to discuss as we have with the other agenda items. So far, CARB is proposing to allocate between $40 and $75 million toward advanced technology demonstration and pilot projects for fiscal year 2022-23. Included in that range of funding is the $10 million proposed to be allocated from the general fund for emerging opportunities. Emerging opportunities will be the first category discussed. This category was highlighted in the proposed budget with an allocation of $10 million from the general fund. The emerging opportunities category is a very exciting opportunity for CARB. My vision for this pot of funding is to allow CARB flexibility to seize opportunities when they present themselves. As many of you know, the normal process to access CARB demonstration and pilot funding can take up to 2 years from budget allocation through the competitive process to agreements being signed to start work on the project, as I just mentioned a few moments ago. My idea for this category is to have a streamlined fund that CARB can access to be able to have a strike when the iron is hot mentality and be able to tackle high carbon emission sources quickly. Basically, the concept I present to you today is more of a fund where we can truncate the competitive process, supplement that with stakeholder engagement, and allow CARB to fund technologies that have great opportunity to reduce emissions and transform the marketplace. These funds could be used for demonstrations, pilots, and maybe some late-stage research and development projects. Further, funds could be used to augment existing projects to take them to the next level. All in all, funds here would be used to seize the moment when time is of the essence. This could almost operate like a venture capital fund. It's unclear if CARB would want to be part of any profit sharing that results from projects funded with these dollars, but that could be possible. I know I have said a lot here, and really the goal is to elicit a response from our stakeholders on how best to implement this opportunity. I will now turn to the typical demonstration and pilot project categories that would follow our regular process. The order I present these projects is not indicative of CARB's support for each of the individual project categories. First is zero emission rail. Without a restriction on whether fiscal year 2022-23 funds will have a freight focus requirement, projects in this category could focus on freight or passenger, switch or line haul, locomotive activity. Our goal here would be zero emission. This project category could either be a demonstration or a pilot. Next is the commercial Harborcraft pilot project. I imagine that this project to be focused on small businesses rather than large operators. Funding for this project may be able to not have the disadvantaged community requirement or the freight requirement for funding, but those decisions right now are with the governor and the legislature. Our hope is to have some flexibility on this category due to the nature of the pending commercial Harborcraft regulation and the timelines for compliance. Next is the Green Zone project. This will be a continuation of the Green Zone project that's outlined in last year's funding plan and which we are currently developing a solicitation for. This is a very diverse project that has lots of opportunities. My feeling is that the Green Zone project is one of those concepts that will be coming back year after year and may morph into its own standalone project soon. The overall goal here is to break down barriers to adoption of zero emission equipment and vehicles at the municipal level. This will be a pilot project that could include large scale zero emission SOAR or small off-road engine deployments like lawn and garden. It could also be a zero emission lawn and garden deployments at cities or groups of cities or school districts. School districts could be a great candidate for holistic projects. Projects could also include construction equipment for road construction and repair, as well as innovative zero emission heavy duty concepts. Some of the concepts we want to explore in the Green Zone project would be how to coordinate among many city departments to foster zero emission, SOAR, off-road equipment adoption and charging infrastructure. And what systems need to be in place in a municipality to foster this type of adoption. We would like to see a city or group of cities or municipalities or even parts of a city implement a green zone with support from the city council, the city, and the city departments that outline a clear and coherent plan for broader zero emission adoption. The next category is port vehicles and equipment. As you can tell from the title, it's a very wide open category that we focus on port activities. Concepts here that are floating around could be a zero emission ecosystem style project with both on and off-road vehicles and equipment working in concert with a common infrastructure install, which is either hydrogen or electricity, or a development of heavy lift cargo handling equipment using hydrogen and fuel cells, expanding operations of zero emission vehicles and equipment at smaller ports or other similar concepts should be considered. I think our goal with this project is to make it open and accessible to port operators to come up with their own concepts. Right now, we want to hear from those stakeholders as to what is a best fit here and how best to remove barriers to your own project's concepts. The final category I want to bring up is zero emission aviation. This is a new category type for CARB. There was a reference to this concept in the draft budget in January. My first blush with this concept is it would be focused on flights that start and end in California. So routes like San Francisco to Sacramento or San Diego to Los Angeles or Orange County. Our hope is that a project in this category could be focused on passenger transportation. The goal right now would be to focus on the aircraft, but ground support equipment that would be needed to support such aircraft could also be eligible. So that's it for the list of categories. It's important to point out that this is not final. We want your input on these categories and others that I did not mention. A final determination of the specific categories will be determined by language in the budget when it's signed by the governor, and the result of future work group meetings and workshops in support of this funding plan. If any stakeholder wants, CARB staff is available for one-on-one meetings to discuss your concepts or to go into more detail on the process for applying for funds or what the timelines would look like. And And with that, I've concluded my presentation, and I would like to turn it over to questions and comments. And so I'll turn it over to Aria to see if we have any hands up.
Thanks, Earl. We have several hands up. First up is Nico. Nico, I have unmuted your mic. Nico, we're unable to hear you.
Two mute buttons, that's why. Sorry about that. Nico Falco with the California Fuel Partnership. A few questions. First one related to the demo pilot category that was described initially. How do the categories demo pilot distinguish themselves from HVIP with regards to the vehicles that qualify for each one of these categories, and also for the entities that apply for that? There is a distinction, I know, but it'd be good to hear that from you directly as well. So that's the first one. I'd like to hear a repeat of that. I think it was an investments venture capitals like fund, that concept, I think it was, if you could repeat that. And then also about the grant administrator of the funds that are going through CARB. Curious if that entity would be excluded from CARB and CEC funding opportunities. And I found it interesting, the description of the relationship that would result from this. It sounds a little bit like existing experience. And then also, if this would be a different entity than an entity that is also allowed to administer grant funds from other state agencies. Thank you.
Okay, Nico. First of all, how is demonstration pilot projects different from HVIP? First of all, HVIP is a first come first serve program to reduce the cost of zero emission trucks and buses into the marketplace. A demonstration project is really outside of that scope. It's pre-commercial, so it really doesn't fit with HVIP. A pilot, though, there is some closeness between a pilot project and HVIP. But a pilot project, really, the goal of a pilot project is to demonstrate larger numbers of vehicles or equipment and the infrastructure in revenue service, and be able to collect data on that and share it with other end users. And so it's really a much more open process. The ability to share that data with other end users is really valuable. And so that's the distinction. The pilot project, which is funded through the demonstration and pilot projects, really is going to pay for a potentially infrastructure, administration of the project, data collection, as well as fuel costs and things like that. So it's a much more holistic take on the deployment of commercialized technologies. The emerging opportunities concept is really new to us. The idea here is to have a fund that CARB can access to be able to take advantage of situations that come up in the near term. And as some of the commenters have pointed out, the timeline for funding for demonstration and pilot projects can be up to 18 to 24 months between when you submit your application or when the legislature approves funding to when we actually implement projects. And so the idea with the Emerging Opportunities Fund would be to actually have access to ready dollars that are already standing by, ready to be deployed. And so that would shorten the amount of time to be able to fund projects. And then also with the emerging opportunities, we want to have the ability to do add-ons to existing projects. And when I say add-ons, mean if there's a project that is underway that CARB has already funded, and then there's a logical next step for that project that is beneficial to the deployment of that technology, we want to be able to access funds to be able to support that type of project. Now, we would not be running this Emerging Opportunities Fund in darkness. We would want to have some type of a stakeholder group that would help CARB make the decisions on which types of funds or which types of projects that we want to fund. Your next question on the third-party administrator being excluded from other funding opportunities. Right now, the way that we see it is if if there is an organization that wants to be the third-party administrator for CARB's demonstration and pilot projects, they would only be prohibited from applying for additional demonstration and pilot project funds. And so they would be taken out of the loop to be able to be an eligible applicant, but that should not restrict their ability to apply for CEC funds or other state agency funds. Nico, I hope that that's answered your questions. If I was unclear on anything, please let me know.
Yeah, you did answer my question. Thank you very much, Earl. One thing that I wanted to add, based on your concepts, considering you're considering options right now, have you also thought more about a concept that I've brought up in the past, is about the potential continued operation of some of the demo of pilot projects that you're currently funding that are underway, because obviously the time frame for how long that operates is just a year or a little longer, which is not necessarily indicative of like how things wear out and where things are really learned, even though there are a lot of learnings going on, but there also is a lot learned from operating things, say at an increased cycle, so operating them in 2 shifts, for example, instead of just 1, or operating them for 2 to 3 years longer than what they initially had to do, because everything is already in place. So it could provide you some additional benefit at a somewhat lower cost, because you're only having to pay basically for the extended operational cost of such a project. Just add that to the mix of things.
Well, thank you so much for that comment, Nico, and I appreciate you bringing it back up, because that's one of the kind of the goals of the Emerging Opportunities Fund, because right now we don't have any ability to provide additional funding for projects that are underway or that are ending without going through that competitive process. And so this would give us that flexibility to be able to take advantage of those opportunities. As an example, if we had a fuel cell transit bus project that we paid 20 or so $1 million for, and we only get 3 months worth of data on the transit buses, we could use funds from the Emerging Opportunities Fund to be able to extend that project to get a more durable database. So I really appreciate that concept.
Yeah, thank you. I'll leave it with that.
Okay, great. Aria?
Thank you, Nico and Earl. Next up, we have Leela Rao. Leela, I've unmuted your mic. Leela, yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, so actually, this is Rose Zoki. I'm actually meeting for Leela Rao, who wasn't able to attend today. But my name is Rose Zoki. I'm an environmental specialist with the Port of Long Beach. The comment I wanted to make was related to the CEC co-funding elements for the CARB proposed grant opportunities. We believe CARB is looking at several different grant opportunities, including modular hydrogen fuel cells, ZE Harborcraft, and potentially locomotives, as you had mentioned, Earl. However, CEC has said that their companion funding this year was limited to on-road applications.
Right.
If CARB is going to go forward with the off-road focus solicitations, which we really hope they do, they will need to consider the fact that there will be no companion infrastructure funding from the CEC for those projects. Therefore, we would recommend adjusting those allocations and/or scope of the grant funding opportunity solicitation accordingly. Otherwise, it's recommended that CARB would talk to CEC, although it sounds like the ability to change how CEC can use their funding may not be something that CARB can do, but this is just a comment that we wanted to make.
Rose, thanks for that comment. And for everybody listening, she's really talking about fiscal year 21-22 funding project concepts. And as we had a work group meeting on that concept February 18th, and the answer to kind of that question, at least right now, is yes, we have a suite of off-road demonstration and pilot projects that we're going to fund from 21-22, and we are looking for opportunities to coordinate with CEC on infrastructure. And one of the ways that we can actually do that is, as they've said, that they have to be focused on-road infrastructure, but if we can tie in both on and off-road infrastructure, then that would then become eligible for funding by CEC. So as an example, and I'm just making this concept up, if we were going to do a fuel cell cargo handling equipment demonstration at the Port of Long Beach, and we wanted CEC to be part of the infrastructure portion, that we need to be able to allow that hydrogen infrastructure to be able to fuel on-road trucks. And if that's if we can do that, then we can access the CEC funding.
see.
So we're looking for those nuances to be able to satisfy CEC's requirements that they focus on on-road funding, but still be able to allow funding for a broader range of vehicle and equipment types to actually support off-road too. So we're really trying to be creative in how we try to utilize the CEC's infrastructure funding.
So is this something that you're considering for fiscal year 22-23 as well? Or have you had discussions with CEC about this?
Yes, we've had those discussions, and the goal that I have is to bring in CEC at every fiscal year going forward. And so we'll begin those direct coordinations on specific category types for 22-23 here really soon. We want to be able to, for us to work as a team and really, for us to be able to work to our strengths. And so bringing CEC on infrastructure is really important there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Earl.
All right, Rose. Aria?
Thank you, Rose. Next up, we have Dave Cook. Dave, I have unmuted your mic.
Thanks. So a couple subjects. One, I wanted to comment on the distribution of funding. And just to comment on the history, there's been a lot of progress with trucks and buses over the years. Earl had mentioned how 400 million was spent. Since 2015, there's only been really one locomotive program that we're aware of that got funded, and that was one locomotive at $21 million. So 40 million to $75 million is definitely generous. But if they really want to, as I was saying before, move the needle, you could lose 50 million just doing a good locomotive pilot program. And you really should do two programs because you've only had one in the past 6 years. So just that 40 to 75, I hate to take money from other people's budgets, but the people living around rail lines have been waiting a long time for some progress in that area. That would need more. Match funding. On these larger projects, a one-to-one match funding is going to keep small companies from being able to compete and overlook some pretty innovative stuff that could be done, because the only people that can promise 30 million of match to a $30 million project are big companies like GE. And at the end of the day, if it was looked at really deeply, I really don't believe they would have put 30 million into the project. So I think the match being mandatory and being that large is going to exclude several companies. Having a point system award credit for having a match sounds, like a good idea. But again, if you're going to do that, I disagree with some of the past matches that I've seen on these really large projects, and would hope that those are scrutinized more if they're awarding points. But a mandatory one-to-one match would keep us from promoting some of the projects we'd like to promote. I like the Emergent Opportunities Fund idea and have some, would like to see how that evolves. And I think that covers, and is there a chance of more funding showing up for the 21-22 budget, or is that going to be stuck at 40 million?
Well, Dave, thank you for your questions and comments. I'll just answer your last one first, and I doubt there will be additional funding for fiscal year 21-22. The budget's already in place, funding plan's already been approved. We're going to go forward with the amount of money that we have allocated, which is 40 million. In that $40 million budget for last year's funding, I want to make sure I'm being very distinct between last year's money and new 22-23 money. We're proposing to do locomotive projects in both 21-22 and 22-23. And so I hear what you're saying about not having a substantial locomotive projects over the last couple of years. That really has not been by design. I'll point out that your comment about the $21 million for one locomotive, that's a little misleading. That was part of our ZANZAF project. ZANZAF projects were holistic freight facility projects. And so that particular project, yes, it did have one zero emission locomotive from Wabtec, but there was also cargo handling equipment, drayage trucks, and infrastructure that was part of that project as well at multiple facilities throughout California. So I will point out that that locomotive that we demonstrated, which that project ended this last August, there's already 16 orders for that locomotive worldwide. So in any measure, that was a success. So it was really great to actually do that project and get that out there, and to see companies wanting to buy that worldwide. And so, which is great. Now, regarding match funding, the one-to-one requirement is not in statute. This is a policy. And so there was a funding year a couple of years ago where we had a 75 to 25% match, where the applicant had to produce 25% of the project costs. And it's comments like this, Dave, that are important for us to be able to go back to management when we're writing a solicitation and say that the stakeholders were saying that the one-to-one match was too high. So I really appreciate that comment. We'll go back with management and talk about that, and we'll see what comes of it. But it'll be in the next year where we really get into the details of a specific match requirement for each one of the project categories.
Well,
And
what about 21, 22?
it's
The
still,
match for the
it's still up in the air. We had our first work group meeting on the 18th of February. We'll have a final work group meeting in late April, and the one-to-one match, like I said, is policy, so we can tweak that. And so I would like to hear from you, Dave, where we can talk one-on-one about how you could see, match working, what you think is the upper bound for your company to participate, and then we'll really dive into that detail in late April when we have our final work group meeting before the release of the fiscal year 21-22 demo and pilot solicitation.
Thanks.
You bet. Aria, next question.
Thank you, Earl. Next up, we have Terry Maines. Terry, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi. Yeah, I was just wondering if you could provide some contact information so that we could reach out one-on-one and have a offline conversation about pilot projects.
You bet.
Thank you.
Put it in the chat. And I'll ask one of my colleagues to please do that.
Thank you so much.
You bet, Terry. Next question.
Yeah, next up, we have Parth Ruparel. Parth, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you. Hey, so I was wondering, how can you briefly tell me about how this is focused on the ETRU applications and electrifying the trailer side of things? We do have our product eHub that's out right now that we're trying to mass produce and go in full production mode, but we want to do more pilots, more demonstrations, and I was wondering, where does this fit into the pilot demonstration program?
Parth, there's just at first blush, there's a couple places that this could fit. The Green Zones project, I think there's an opportunity there, because one of the concepts is be able to try to transition to a zero emissions. You can imagine if a city creates a green zone, let's say in their downtown area, and there's restaurants there that need to be served by food delivery services, someone like Cisco or one of those other companies like Cormark, you can see how there'd be an advantage to them being able to recharge batteries with the regenerative braking on the trailer as well. So there's opportunities there. But the point is here, and it applies to anybody's technology, and that is if there's anything that I've talked about from this year's funding that you find intriguing, but it really doesn't nail your project category, the way to participate is become part of a larger project. And so CARB wants to see larger projects. And so like our port vehicle and equipment project concept that I was talking about earlier, if we're talking about refrigerated cargo, let's say coming out of Port of San Diego, and we're doing fruit that's coming from South America there, they need to use a TRU system. They're hauling that throughout the entire Southland. There's opportunities there. And so I may not have specifically said that we're doing a trailer project, but there's opportunities that are embedded in these larger projects. And so that's how I would encourage you, Parth, to take advantage of the categories that I've talked about. And I'd also point you to the fiscal year 21-22 projects. There is a large focus on off-road, as Dave Cook was mentioning, but we also have that green zones project concept there. And so there are opportunities. You just have to figure out where those opportunities are within the larger projects. And I'll be more than happy to help you think through those concepts.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was going to be my next question. If we can connect, one-on-one, maybe I'll shoot you an email and then we can take it from there.
Great, Parth. And I saw that one of my colleagues did put my email contact in the chat. So please capture that before the end of the meeting so you have access to it.
Perfect. Thanks. I really appreciate it.
All right. Aria?
All right, well, I think we are at time for this agenda item. So thank you, Earl, and thank you for everyone who provided feedback. We'll go ahead and move on to the discussion of the Clean Off-Road Equipment Voucher Incentive Project, or CORE. So I'd like to introduce my colleague, Todd Sterling.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for your time today. A little talk about CORE. CORE is intended to accelerate the deployment of advanced technology in the off-road sector by providing a streamlined way for fleets to access funding, which will help offset the incremental cost of such technology. CORE targets commercial-ready products which have not yet achieved a significant market foothold. This program allows stacking, which means you can use funding from this program and other incentive programs, but still need to follow incentive rules for each. Also, CORE does not require scrappage of one of your current pieces of equipment. The program is a first come, first served system. In the past, funding sources limited projects to freight movement equipment. In the past, we had 6 equipment categories. This year's funding allows us to expand into more off-road equipment types. We talked a little bit earlier about the separation between the 21-22 funding, which is happening right now. This meeting is talking more about the 22-23 and how we can expand on this even more. Like I said, like this year for the 21-22, we have 10 equipment categories to offer incentives. Again, this is building on the first round. We're expanding new categories like construction, ag, commercial harborcraft, and professional landscaping for small business and sole proprietors. We'll continue to work with stakeholders to improve the current funding allocation, but look forward to include core vouchers and incentives in the next year funding plan, and look forward to your input on the 22-23 funds. If someone wants to get a hold of me, my email address is, we can put that in the chat also, but it's todd.sterling@arb.ca.gov. If you want to talk about the current funding program that's going on right now. So open up to questions on if you want to talk about 22-23 and how we can look forward to additional funding opportunities in CORE. Thank you.
Todd, are you ready to open it up for questions?
Yes, and any questions that you have, Aria? That'd be awesome.
Yeah, we have one raised hand. Jamie Levin, I have unmuted your mic.
Well, actually, my hand is raised for the last 3 topics. I have comments on those, but you cut short the time to respond. And I have a comment on the HFIT program. So I'm not sure. I'm happy to be first up on the HFIT program. Or if no one else has a question regarding CORE, I do have some comments and questions regarding the Earl's presentation and also on the loan and purchase agreement.
So before we move on to HVIP, it did look like we had a couple of comments in the Q&A box or questions in the Q&A box that relate to core. So Todd, I'll go ahead and read those out to you.
Okay, thank you.
Jamie, if you could hang tight and we'll call on you when we get to the HVIP section. We will go ahead and do that.
Okay, thank you, Andrea.
Thank you. So Todd, Terry Maines is asking if you can offer any updates as to when core will be opening up again this year.
So for the 21-22 funding that is happening right now, we're planning on having another work group meeting probably early May timeframe, and then we'll have a definitive date for when the vouchers will be opening up in early summer this year.
Great, thank you for that. And then we have another comment from Cindy Rosa with Zero Knox Inc. And they specialize in advanced battery technology and their own line of off-road UTVs and all electric forklifts, as well as retrofits. And she's asking if any of the funding opportunities, if their vehicles would qualify for, and if so, what projects? So I'm wondering if you can speak a little to forklifts eligibility within core.
Right, so forklifts was eligible in the first round of funding. Larger size forklifts, so 8,000 pound lift capacity and greater, and we're kind of sticking with that for this next round for the 21-22 funding also. So larger forklifts are included in this next round that's coming up, opening up, like I mentioned earlier, probably early to midsummer 2022.
All right, thank you. And I think it looks like we may have a raised hand from Dave Cook. So Aria, can you?
Yep. Dave, I have unmuted your mic.
Sorry, I'm guilty of having my hand up when I shouldn't have. He answered the question about the next meetings, so thanks.
Thank you, Dave. We also now have another raised hand from Parth. Parth, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you. This is just more of a comment for Todd. Todd, I've been trying to get in touch with you for the past couple of weeks. Just wanted to speak more about the core incentive and regarding our system. So whenever you get a chance, if you get get back, that would really appreciate it.
Right, we've been working with our TRU regulatory folks to make sure we can answer your question correctly, but more than happy to get together with the TRU regulatory folks and our staff so we can have a one-on-one meeting with you guys.
Fantastic, thank you.
Sure.
And that is it for raised hands.
All right, I see a few more questions for Todd have come in the Q&A. So this question is from Bradley Northrop. Are there any resources available regarding what types of off-road equipment are currently market ready and available for sale? And then he specifies outside of forklifts.
Right, so currently our project administrator is CalStart, and so I can put the CalStart web address on this chat. They have a list of current available equipment. Obviously, we're expanding that this year into 10 different categories. We will open those up here. Like I said, we'll be having a meeting here in early May to open those up to manufacturers and dealers to apply for the program. And you'll see hopefully a bunch of different pieces of off-road equipment that owners and operators can choose from to bring into California.
Thanks, Todd. We have another raised hand from Nico. Nico, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you, Aria. And you may have addressed this already, but backtracking to an earlier comment about an upcoming workshop, did you also include April 6th workshop that was mentioned by Jason in the comment about the workshops and where to find information about those?
If I said a workshop, I misspoke. It would be a work group meeting coming up in May.
sorry.
This would just be for core. So probably early May will be. You're talking about launching or at least releasing the implementation manual. We're editing that right now, so everybody can see that, and kind of launching and opening up the opportunity for manufacturers and dealers to apply for the program.
Yeah, I meant work group. Apologies for that. Thank you.
There are no more raised hands.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Todd. So we can go on and move on to our next agenda item, which is HVIP. So realizing I didn't do an introduction of myself earlier, I'm Andrea Morgan. I'm the staff lead for HVIP. And just to provide a little bit of background on HVIP, HVIP provides first come, first served funding for early commercial deployments of zero emission heavy duty vehicle technologies in California. And as many of you know, HVIP has proven to be very popular, and we've seen a huge increase in demand in recent years. And there's a number of factors that contribute to this increase in demand: technological improvements, a growing number of manufacturers with offerings in the heavy duty zero emission market, planned regulations, and a lower total cost of ownership for zero emission trucks. HVIP is currently closed to new voucher requests, but it will reopen on March 30th with a total of $430 million in funding for the current fiscal year. And as we discussed earlier, we're considering allocating a substantial amount of funding to HVIP for the upcoming fiscal year. We're considering making additional policy changes to HVIP as well to better support program goals. As we consider policy changes, we look to HVIP's guiding principles, which are accelerate market transformation for the cleanest advanced technologies, support the goals laid out in CARB's long-term heavy-duty investment strategy, drive purchase decisions, maintain simplicity and a fleet-friendly process, support CARB regulatory programs, avoid market disruptions caused by unpredictable funding availability, graduate established technologies, and support more equitable investments. Looking at the year ahead, one principle we know we need to key in on this year is avoiding market disruptions caused by unpredictable funding availability. While the increased demand for zero emission technology is exciting, it has also meant that HVIP has been forced to close after becoming oversubscribed. And we have heard very clearly from our stakeholders that reliable and continuous availability of HVIP funds is critical to help fleet owners plan and make purchase decisions, and that it's even more important for small fleets and owner operators. So we've made a number of changes to HVIP over the past 2 years that we expect will help regulate demand, including reducing voucher amounts and limiting the number of vouchers a single fleet can request per year. Additionally, we expect that the fleet size limits, which take effect in January of 2023, will help ensure that HVIP funds are consistently available for the medium and small fleets who have the greatest need for incentives. The fleet size limits also help us address several other guiding principles, including supporting more equitable investments and driving purchase decisions. We are open to and considering additional measures that can help regulate demand within HVIP, including reducing voucher amounts further, or creating a tiered voucher amount system where voucher amounts vary depending on fleet size. We're also considering additional measures we can take to further support equity. And that can include adding a voucher enhancement or providing a small increase in voucher amounts for fleets that choose to buy vehicles produced by manufacturers who demonstrate a commitment to creating high quality jobs and workforce training opportunities. Additionally, we are considering measures that we can take to further accelerate the deployment of advanced vehicle technologies that help support the state's energy future and grid resiliency goals. And finally, we're considering continuing to provide support to the innovative small e-fleets pilot. We've received a lot of support from stakeholders for this new pilot, which we anticipate will launch in early spring or summer of this year. And we will be closely monitoring the pilot as it opens to determine if changes to our approach are needed to better support the unique needs of small fleets. So these are all very initial and very high level concepts, and we would welcome feedback on these concepts today, as well as any other suggestions on how we can improve HVIP. We will be very closely watching demand as HVIP reopens on March 30th, and the lessons we learned from the reopening will help inform our policy recommendations for this year, particularly as they pertain to any measures to regulate demand within HVIP. To that end, we are planning on holding an additional work group on HVIP in early May to discuss preliminary proposals in greater details, as well as share with all of you what we learn when HVIP reopens at the end of March. With that, I will open it up for questions and comments on these draft concepts.
Thank you, Andrea. First up, we have Jamie Levin. Jamie, I've unmuted your mic.
Aha, I've succeeded. Thank you. Thanks, Andrea. I know you and Rochelle were very patient with me discussing the last year's guidebook to HVIP as it relates to taxes. And I know the new guidebook has just been released for this year, but as it relates to next year, and I assume there will be further workshops on this, I cannot emphasize enough about the importance of allowing taxes, both sales tax and federal excise tax for trucks, to be included in the 90% limit on HVIP funding. I realize the HVIP amount is capped. It's presently capped at 300,000 for drayage and 240, I believe it is, for regional haul. But taxes really put a considerable burden on zero emission vehicles, and very much so for fuel cell trucks. And so I really would like to see you give further consideration to changing that rule in order to scale up the volume, which leads me to my second point. And this was touched on by Nico Bokamp and Matt Schrapp. And I think you have to look differently at the fleet size limits, because if you really want to make these zero emission vehicles affordable for the many of the independent small truckers, you've got to look at the impacts on the used truck market. And the way to build that is to allow large scale procurements from bigger fleet operators who can afford not only the capital costs of the trucks, which in itself is very expensive, but also the full TCO, the cost of fuel in the case of hydrogen, the cost of maintenance and service. And so in my view, one of the best ways to open up the markets to smaller fleet operators or smaller independent truckers is to establish a good, strong secondary market. This also goes back to the loan purchase agreement discussion. I think that needs to be looked at, not just in terms of the capital cost of the vehicle, but the total cost of ownership. And one other perspective on this issue, which does in some measure favor heavy duty Class 8 fuel cell trucks and their ability to achieve long range. We're talking, our particular project is going to deploy next year trucks with up to a 500-mile range. We see even longer range for longer haul purposes. Many truckers, even the drayage operators, don't just serve short haul trips. They do short haul, regional, as well as long haul. So kind of one size fits all. perspective, I think, is really important. So third point under HVIP is I would ask you to consider increasing the amounts available for regional haul trucks, especially as it serves the Central Valley. I think the reduced amounts, I understand the priority with drayage, especially as it affects EJ communities adjacent to ports, but there are many impacts in the Central Valley from regional haul trucks. And I think the limit of 240,000 is, makes it more difficult. And I'd like you to think about increasing that. And then I would just want to touch, since I have the floor at the moment, back to Earl's discussion of emerging fund opportunity. I think that is a great plan. Earl, I've already sent you a request for such a meeting on a technology that we want to present to you. But I want to emphasize that as good as transit buses are now being demonstrated and actually deployed, except for price, technology readiness is showing commercial viability. Coaches, long-haul coaches that can go 70 miles an hour at 50 to 55,000 pound gross vehicle weight, long distances to serve intercity services throughout the state. That is a application that needs some demonstration funding. We believe we can address this, but we need to build prototypes that don't exist. And then lastly, and I will be quiet, Andrea, I appreciate the extra time. Both for pilot and for HVIP, I further encourage large-scale applications because as it relates to fuel cells, because of the value of the hydrogen hub program to be able to cost share. We are going to deploy 30 fuel cell electric trucks, which, by the way, are going through the executive order for zero emission and then will be classified. We are going to request eligibility for HVIP. Someone earlier asked about Class 8 zero emission trucks that are eligible for HVIP. There will be a Hyundai truck for that purpose. But large scale applications, and not just with Hyundai, but there are other truck OEMs we're working with who want to build hundreds of trucks that will drive down costs and will be able to leverage our competitive position with respect to the hydrogen hub program being offered by DOE. And with that, I thank you for giving me the extra time.
All right. Thank you, Jamie, for all of that feedback. I was taking notes as you were going through everything, and we certainly appreciate your thoughts and comments, and have seen some of the concerns that you've raised related to taxes and allowing for HVIP when it's taxed with other programs and to cover state, federal taxes and other tax sources. And we'll certainly take that and your other points into consideration. One thing I did want to note, that of the data that we saw last year as HVIP was opening, with relation to the medium and small fleets and their participation in HVIP, is that we actually saw about 43% of fleets that were requesting HVIP vouchers last year were fleets of 100 vehicles or less. So that was a bit higher than we had initially expected here at CARB. So wanted to share that with all of our stakeholders today, so that everyone is aware that we do see a pretty strong interest from these small and medium fleets in making the transition to zero emission and also purchasing zero emission trucks. So as we move forward, as I said earlier, we will be very closely watching to see what happens in HVIP this year, since last year was a very strange year. And we'll discuss more at our work group in May, the results of that, and any sorts of changes we think may be necessary to the fleet size limits or to HVIP as a whole.
No, Andrea, just one other comment. I'm hoping that you and staff will spend more time talking to many of these fleet operators who need trucks that can perform various requirements, especially as it relates to payload, multiple shifts. We even, with fuel cells, which have a lighter curb weight than battery electric trucks, still are not light enough to carry some of the payloads that they're used to, or that they have to carry to be competitive, to pull these out of terminals and for drayage operation and regional haul. And so we want to make sure we're providing a technology that makes a business case for these end users. And that also, by the way, includes the cost of fuel as it relates to hydrogen. It's a big factor in all of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. And we certainly do always welcome the opportunity and look for opportunities to talk with fleet operators and those who are working with these technologies and understand the barriers to adoption and some of the opportunities there. So certainly encourage anyone who is on the call to reach out to me if you'd like to discuss one-on-one, or if you have suggestions on fleet operators that you think it would be good for us to reach out to or talk to. We would certainly welcome that as well.
Thank you, Jamie and Andrea. Next up, we have Brett Stevens. Brett, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you, Aria, and thank you, Andrea. Brett Stevens, Daimler Trucks. I'm not going to reiterate some of the sentiments shared by other participants here, but being a large OEM, I'm sure you can understand and anticipate what some of those shared beliefs are. But I do want to kind of come back to the allocation piece of it. It is my opinion as an environmentalist and somebody focused on the sustainability that the focus on funding should be on applications that really have the highest vehicle utilization and therefore the greatest environmental benefit. While we are in the market of manufacturing and selling buses, they have dwell times. A lot of the off-highway vehicle has long dwell times as well where they're not being utilized, whereas commercial class 6, 7, and 8 vehicles are assets for the organization that is operating them, and they maximize that utilization as best as they can. And that really parlays to my additional comment regarding the large fleet size limitations. During this early adoption phase, the economy of scale is really the best leverage of money out there. And these large fleets really have one of the greatest opportunities to adopt these vehicles, get them on the road, and take advantage, better leverage of the make-ready dollars that the utilities are offering as well for their large depot installations. And so I guess my question would be, with the fleet cap, I don't anticipate much movement on that, understandably so, but is there any opportunity for fleets, larger fleets that operate or have the vehicles domiciled in disadvantaged communities to receive some sort of exception or waiver on that topic? And then secondly, Andrew, I know I may have asked this before, but how exactly is the fleet size determined? Is that based specifically on California registrations? And if so, can a national fleet basically pursue vouchers up to 100 registrations in the state of California?
Yeah, so those are some great points and questions, Brett. So with respect to your last question about how we're defining fleet size, we are looking at the vehicles that are operated within California. So we'd be looking at similar sorts of criteria that you see with CARB's truck and bus programs, of really focusing in on those heavy duty vehicles that are registered and operated within the state. We're certainly open to working with stakeholders to better define exactly how we should be drawing those lines so that it is something that is fair, both to fleets that operate exclusively within the state and fleets that operate more broadly across the United States. So we'd welcome feedback there. With respect to some of your other comments about changing voucher amounts based off of how much vehicles operate. That is something that we're looking into this year, if we should be reducing voucher amounts for certain vehicle classes, if there are different methods we should be using altogether to determine how much an incentive someone receives for any given vehicle type. I say that when we're thinking about these things, we do tend to think about some of the guiding principles of HVIP, namely us wanting to make sure we're informing purchase decisions, advancing the technology, and maintaining HVIP is a pretty simple and easy to access program. So that's something that we had always heard about HVIP, and why it was so popular was that it's easy for fleets to understand. It's generally pretty easy to explain, and it's a little less confusing than some of our programs that operate on a more competitive basis or are really tied to emissions reductions. So that's just kind of gives you an idea of what we're thinking about this year, but we're certainly open to additional feedback and other suggestions on how we could be making this transition or how to reduce voucher amounts further. And your last comments on the fleet size limit, and if there's an opportunity for us to think a little bit differently about the larger fleets, and if they can, if we can carve something out for larger fleets that are operating in disadvantaged communities. I think we definitely want to make sure that we are seeing zero emission vehicles deployed in disadvantaged communities. So that's something that we're going to be looking at more closely too as HVIP reopens, and as we're thinking more about that data and what the year ahead looks like. So I think that is a great suggestion that we'll take under consideration, and appreciate your comments there.
Yeah, thank you for the insightful response. I broke my first rule, which was I had a little note here to say thank you first. I do want to, again, that this is an amazing amount of funding available. It's an amazing foot forward by the state of California to pursue the adoption of clean electric vehicles. And you guys are the benchmark that we bring up when we talk to other agencies and legislators about how to meet their advanced clean truck rule requirements and what good models look like. So I want to get that out there. HVIP is an easy to administer program. We do definitely appreciate that. And thank you.
Thank you, Brett. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Brett and Andrea. Next up, we have Catherine Oster. Catherine, I have unmuted your mic. Catherine, you'll need to unmute on your end. I'm not sure if Catherine is there, but for right now, we'll move on to the next raise hand. Next up, we have Zachary Khan. Zachary, I have unmuted your mic.
Great, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you for doing this. And Andrew, I appreciate a lot of your comments on HVIP. I did note that you had mentioned that you guys are looking at a tiered based approach, perhaps based on fleet size. I hope that is indicating that you are taking a lot of these concerns about the fleet size limits that are out there into consideration. We do hope, we support a lot of the comments that have been made, seeking to move past that. And if you're looking at kind of a tiered approach, and I think that's certainly one way to do it, where larger fleets get somewhat reduced incentive vouchers. I think that can help with driving early action ahead of any regulatory requirements that might be coming with the Advanced Clean Fleet. And there's also ways to sort of protect smaller and medium fleets by putting in some set aside amount of funding, so all the funding will not go to larger fleets. And then the other thing I want to mention or make comment on is I know part of the beauty of HFIP for years has been, first come, first serve, but I think the last few rounds have really shown the limitations for that. So I was pleased to hear a lot of your initial comments about trying to avoid disruptions and make this fleet friendly and drive decision making, which becomes very difficult when the money goes out the door so quickly. And one idea that we've discussed in the past and would like to bring up again is perhaps instead of this first come, first serve approach, shifting to more of a bid or RFP type process where participating entities could submit proposals in which they basically say how many zero emission vehicles they'd like to purchase and how much funding they would need to do so. So then CARB could allocate the funds based on these proposals in a way that requires the least amount of funding per ton of anticipated CO2 emissions reductions based on the vehicle type and anticipated use case. So this is certainly more complex, but it has a lot more advantages over the current approach. It will ensure that the dollars flow to where they provide the most benefit, and it imposes some competitive pressure on operators who will sharpen their pencils to ensure that they're best situated to win those grant funds. And our ARB would no longer be sort of in the role of trying to administratively determine what the demand curve looks like, because they would have all the data from all the applications in this bid process from operators across the state as to just how big the demand is and what the incentive number is needed to really drive adoption. I think this methodology could be tweaked to increase the odds that projects involving vehicles in disadvantaged communities are selected for funding by putting additional points in those categories. And there could also be a carve out in this type of programs for smaller, medium-sized fleets to ensure that large fleets win all the funding. I think there's a lot of benefits to this kind of approach. It would be different than what's been done in the past, but I do think the time is now, given where the market is, to really move to something that would ensure that we get the most zero emission vehicles out on the road per dollar spent by CARB. Thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you for those comments and really sharing some of your more innovative ideas about how we can be more broad, changing HVIP to reflect the demand that we've been seeing. A couple of things I want to say here. One, we are really optimistic that this year will be different than what we saw last year. Last year was an incredibly unusual year for HVIP, and there's a few reasons for that. We first ran out of funding in 2019, and I think November. And so the program had been closed for about 18 months before HVIP reopened for the first time last year. And in that span, we were only allocated an additional $25 million for HVIP. So that meant there was a lot of pent-up demand and not that much funding available. So it was not surprising to us that when we reopened HVIP last year in this sort of phased approach of 3 waves, that funding went very quickly. But during that time, we also made a number of different policy changes, as I mentioned, of limiting the number of vouchers any individual fleet could request at a given time, reducing voucher amounts, and of course, this fleet size limit, which will be taking effect next year. All of these are things that we think will help manage demand. So we will be, as I've mentioned, we will be really closely watching HVIP as it reopens this year, but we are optimistic that with this record-breaking amount of incentives flowing into HVIP this year, that it'll be a different scenario. But we'll share more with that and what happens when HVIP reopens on March 30th with you all in early May as we regroup to talk about policy further. With respect to some of your comments on things that we could do differently based off of with this more RFP type approach, I think you heard and hit on a few of the things that we had said earlier about wanting to make sure that HVIP retains its ability to be really easy to understand and easy to access. And I think too, we really put a lot of thought into how we're figuring out the voucher incentive amounts. Because we want it to be high enough to be motivating purchase incentives, but of course not be so high that it's something that that we're not getting as much bang for our buck as we could, as you know. And one of the things that is a little concerning to us about some of these RFP approaches, particularly if we don't have a fleet size limit or something similar that takes some of the bigger players out that really have the ability to purchase zero emission vehicles on their own or with minimal incentive approaches, is that it would be encouraging folks to come in and essentially be putting in bids that would undercut what the true need is in the program and just take an additional few $1,000s as a bonus on a vehicle purchase that they were already going to make. Essentially, we're trying to avoid the free rider problem here. And that's a tricky thing to figure out. So that's something, Zach, we'd be interested in engaging with you on a bit more if we were to move forward with this sort of approach, but is one of the concerns we have at the moment with something like that. And we do also want to make sure that any changes we make to the program aren't putting small and medium-sized fleets at a disadvantage for accessing HVIP funds. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about as we're thinking through policy changes for this upcoming year.
Yeah, I'd be happy to follow up and have additional discussions. I think having carve outs for smaller fleets and medium-sized fleets, but also to your first point about bigger fleets coming in and sort of taking the funding, because they need less incentives. I don't necessarily know of many fleets that are just purchasing trucks right now with no incentives. I think there's still a need for incentives. And if they came in and said, let's say a operator came in and needed 50 trucks at a cost of $25,000 to get them over the hump, that would be great because CARB would be able to get a lot more trucks out for a lot fewer dollars of incentives. And I just think looking back at the demand problem for the last 2 years, it wasn't a problem, the funding problem the last 2 years, the other way to look at it is there's so much demand that a lot of these projects could have gone forward with slightly lower voucher amounts. So appreciate all the work you've done, appreciate the reductions and a lot of the changes that have been made, but look forward to further discussions on this issue. Appreciate the time.
Thank you, Zachary. Next up, we have Christian Corby. Christian, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi there, good afternoon. My name is Christian Corby and I'm the Deputy Executive Director at the California Electric Transportation Coalition. And so I want to reiterate some things that you've heard a couple of times, and I know Cal ITC's positions on these, but I just thought it was still worthwhile to voice our thoughts on this. And yeah, we definitely agree with a lot of the comments about taking another look at the fleet size limits. At just the beginning stages of this market, we just don't see this as being the right direction, although understanding that yes, there is significant demand, and we are also greatly anticipating the data that comes out of the next couple of HVIP releases. So definitely looking forward to that. One point that I thought was really well made at a recent infrastructure meeting for the Advanced Clean Fleets Rule was actually by Matt Schaup from the Harbor Freight Association. I think I got that right, but Matt, you'll have to correct me. He was talking about how a lot of the really small fleets, the small trucking owners are going to have to rely on public charging because they don't own the land on which they operate, or they where they store their trucks is on like a leased piece of property. So they don't necessarily have the power to install their own infrastructure and will need to rely on public charging. So right now, I would suspect a lot of the HVIP vouchers are going to fleets that can install their own infrastructure, since the medium and heavy duty ZEB charging, public charging is it's just at the very nascent stage. So I just wanted to make that point and just know that we're you know, we want to move as fast as we can in the right direction for electrification, and we've got a really long way to go. And we hope that we can kind of revisit some of these things as we learn more after the changes have been made. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, Christian. I think that those are all great points and things that we are definitely thinking about. And the infrastructure element is, of course, critical as you're thinking about supporting the broader transition to zero emission, and particularly as it pertains to small fleets and individual owner operators. So there are a few things going on within the infrastructure space and public infrastructure. Of course, we are coordinating very closely with CEC on some of their existing programs to encourage more infrastructure throughout the states and provide support for folks who receive HVIP vouchers and are looking to install their own infrastructure, and more broad support for public infrastructure as well. I think when we're talking about small and medium fleets too, I want to be very clear that when we talk about these fleet size limits of 100 or 50, we definitely don't consider a small fleet necessarily to be 50. We are also looking at what we can do to provide additional support for those much smaller fleets and individual owner operators. And one of the avenues we've been doing that in is through our innovative small e-fleet pilots. And that's something where we are looking at more innovative solutions like full all-inclusive leasing that do include fueling or charging infrastructure as part of the lease terms to make it easier on those smaller operators. So that has been something that's really been on our minds lately.
Thank you, Andrea. We're going to try again, Catherine. Catherine, I have unmuted your mic. Catherine, I'm unable to see if you're unmuted or not. I'm guessing you're not. So please send me an email and I'll put my email back in the chat if you'd like to make another comment. Next up, we have Joe Dallum. Joe, I have unmuted your mic. Joe, you'll need to unmute on your end.
Got it. Thank you. Yep, this is Joe Dallum. Work for Odyne, and Odyne develops and sells electrification systems for medium and heavy duty trucks. First, I'd like to start off by thanking CARB for including EPTO in the HVIP program. So EPTO is a technology that basically creates a zero emissions operation for trucks that would typically be operating to, their engines operating to operate equipment or export power, such as using generators. So thank you very much. One of the things, though, that's been difficult, and you've covered this to a certain extent, is that the purchase orders have to align with the availability of funding. And what we've seen is that with municipalities and some other customers, it's often difficult to align with, the opening of the funding. So we're hopeful, just as you are, that the funds will last a lot longer, and that hopefully when the purchase orders, are out, that the funding will be available. Second comment I'd have is that there's a need for larger systems. So trucks, as you can imagine, have a lot of different types of equipment. Some of them are very large. As an example, we were the first to be approved to operate a digger derrick, which is a very high power application, all electrically. And the battery system that we needed to do that was over twice the battery that is like the kind of the threshold for the top level of funding. And we would recommend that as these types of equipment that are, requiring much more power to operate, that the funding levels be increased, to, let's say 30 kilowatt hours or even up to 45 kilowatt hours to account for much larger pieces of equipment. There's additional costs and, beyond just the battery systems, you have much larger electric motors, power electronics, and other components that increase the cost of the system. One of the other things here is, as you get up into the larger pieces of equipment, the incremental costs can be substantial. And, I suggest if CARB could take a look at the total incremental cost of the ePTO system above certain battery thresholds, it would be helpful to maybe raise that to, let's say, 50% of the total cost of the system to perhaps 60 or 70% of the incremental cost of the system to make it more affordable in comparison to current prices of equipment. And final comment I have is that the systems, the ePTO program is currently limited to those with internal combustion engines. So one of the things that we found so far is that many of the manufacturers of fully electric vehicles have designed their systems for pickup and delivery applications. And based on some of the CARB calls that have been out there, there's some challenges I think that government agencies and others are facing with the use of fully electric vehicles, with certain types of equipment in regards to not being able to power that type of equipment and so forth. And the question is, could CARB extend HVIP ePTO to zero emissions vehicles, where the amount of the ePTO credit would be based upon the amount of additional energy that is added to the vehicle? And it may sound a little strange, but EVs actually do need additional energy. What's going on right now, and I've talked with numerous OEMs that make EVs, is that the traction batteries, they typically don't want anybody tapping into that source because they don't want any type of critical fault from a secondary system and disabling the mobility of the truck. Secondly, the OEMs are trying to save the battery capacity to maximize range, and so they really don't want too many other loads tapping into their traction battery. So, when you're at a work site, often you need this additional energy. And then third is that some of the high voltage levels in the traction batteries aren't necessarily suitable for the type of equipment that needs to be powered. So there does appear to be a need for additional battery systems and power on full EVs to run worksite equipment, and be appreciative if you could consider that in future regulations or future incentives. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Those were some really great points. And I was taking a lot of notes while you were talking. I think it might make sense for us to have some individual conversations about this as well. We'd certainly be interested in what you're seeing specifically in terms of incremental costs and recommendations on how we should be adjusting voucher amounts specific to ePTOs and some of your other suggestions. So I'll put my email address in the chat. If you can reach out to me after this meeting, we'll hopefully be able to schedule some time for us to discuss further.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe and Andrea. Okay, I've spoken with Catherine, and Catherine, I have unmuted your phone line. Go ahead. You'll need to press #6. Catherine?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And I really apologize for not being able to hear me before. First of all, I just want to say, is there an echo in the background?
Yes, there is. Catherine, why don't you mute your computer?
Okay, I'll do that. Okay, is that better?
Yes, it is.
Great. Okay. I I just want to first say thank you very much for holding this session today. It's been really helpful. It's like to hear different perspectives. Right now, I think the way I look at the HVIP program is you've got funding right now. I think in the last HVIP round, only 6% of the funding went to vehicles that were, a size of 10 vehicles or less. And right now, we're looking in the market, and in order to meet the ZEB requirements that we have, we need solutions that are for 100% of the market, including the 75% of the market that are these small independents. And while I think the only way that we're going to meet the ZEB requirements is if, for example, you have next year 6,000 trucks that will come off the registry. And if you take 75% of that, those are 4,000 will be the small independent drivers. And so we need a solution for those drivers. And we believe that those drivers don't have to drive the older diesel trucks, but that there are, if structured properly, the funding can be available to allow drivers of these small fleets to tap into new zero emission vehicles. And we think that's structuring programs like HVIP, either the standard HVIP or expanding the innovative fleet program to allow service providers who can wrap the both providing the trucks, the charging stations, and monetize the incentives, and then allow drivers to pay a monthly or quarterly amount rather than the huge upfront cost of an electric vehicle, and do so in a way that allows them to be at parity with a diesel truck or to save money compared to a diesel truck. And so, as I said, it's whether you expand the standard program to allow service providers to participate, or you expand the innovative fleet up to a much larger amount to accommodate the 75% of the market. And thanks for the time.
Thank you, Catherine. Before you unmute yourself, would you please restate your affiliation? I didn't quite catch it.
Yep, I'm with Foreign Mobility.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you for the reminder there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so we are really excited about some of these different innovative leasing models, and as you know, and I was just mentioning, that really is what our innovative small e-fleets program is designed to be looking at greater detail. And so I can give you a little bit more insight on our thoughts behind the allocation for this coming year, as well as how we set our allocation level for that pilot within HVIP. This, again, was really intended to be a pilot program because to us, these different types of financing models are something that's relatively new. We're not aware of many places where they've been deployed yet. So we do want to get some familiarity with how these different financial mechanisms work before we begin to invest even more significant dollar amounts into them. It is something that we certainly see these types of models being something that can play a much greater role within HVIP and our broader heavy duty portfolio in general in the future. But we do think that it's an important first step for us to see how this initial round of innovative small e-fleets goes this year as it opens, and for us to gain some more insights from that program as it first launches, and have continued investments in it for the upcoming fiscal year, but keep them at somewhat moderate levels before we invest more fully in this type of model. So that's a little bit of our perspective of where we're coming from on that. We do recognize that there are significant challenges for the smaller fleets in making the transition to zero emission. And we do want to make sure that we're providing avenues for participation within HVIP, and some of what you've seen in our policies are really geared to help address that, both with the fleet size limits within the standard HVIPs and us beginning this innovative small e-fleet program and continuing to support it in the upcoming fiscal year.
Thank you, Catherine. Next up, we have Matt Schrapp. Matt, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, thanks, guys. I'll keep it brief. I know we're getting towards the end of the time here, but I think you just heard repeatedly and understanding the need for small fleets. I mean, we're never going to be able to get electric trucks deployed by the end of this year. For those folks who are going to be out of compliance, it'll be very difficult with the current manufacturing constraints that we have. Even if, you know, the March 30th date goes off with no hitches at all. But I think you've heard repeatedly that there's some grave concern around the fleet size cap. And you know how the truck and bus rule works is that it's not just California registered vehicles. Andrea, I know that that's not what you were saying, but it sort of sounded like that. You know, the rules are for any heavy duty vehicle that comes into California. The registration is where there's an enforcement mechanism. So, you know, how the fleets rule, on-road truck and bus rule looks at fleet sizes, common ownership or control, and whether or not that could be modified for purposes of HVIP to look at number of vehicles in California or something. I just feel like we need a much more creative approach than just cutting it off at the end of this year, because those medium and, you know, less than 100 truck fleets that you're talking about right now who are participating in the program aren't necessarily the large Class 8 heavy duty motor carriers, especially that are engaged in port work. I'm thinking of the top 10 motor carriers across the US who primarily are engaged in intermodal drayage, rail yards and maritime ports. So I think you've heard it several times that there is a consensus that those fleet size caps are misplaced at this point in time. So I just want to reiterate that fact. I think innovative e-fleets is a great concept. One other thing in HVIP that might be looked at is to allow leasing companies to participate in the traditional HVIP, not necessarily the trucks as a leasing concept under innovative e-fleets, but in the normal HVIP program. That might help to open up some participation as well and to get these trucks into the hands of smaller operators as well as populate the secondary market. So I'll end it there. But again, I think that we need to take a hard look at these fleet size caps, at least over the next couple of years. Maybe it needs to be pushed off into 2025 or later perhaps, but I think there's consensus there. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your feedback on that, Matt. And I'm not going to spend too long responding to this, since I know everyone has heard me address these points throughout the past 30 minutes or so. But one thing I will say is when we did take this to our board last year, we did hear feedback on both sides of this issue. Of course, many of the same concerns that you and others have raised today, that it might just be too soon for these fleet size limits. But on the other side, we did hear from a number of our equity and environmental advocates that these fleet size limits were needed and something that communities wanted to see. Folks' incentives being more focused towards those small businesses and folks who lived and worked in their communities. So I think there are still two sides to this issue. We are, of course, and we do as CARB continue to think that fleet size limits are appropriate and important for the stage that we are in the general market, and to reflect what we've been seeing in HVIP demand. That being said, as you've heard me say many times today, we are really committed to seeing what comes out of the March 30th reopening of HVIP and continuing to work with all of our stakeholders to make sure that ultimately what we bring to our board this year is reflective of the demand that we're seeing in the market and in HVIP, and is a policy that is makes sense. So we are we're hearing and taking a lot of notes on the feedback that we've received today. So thank you all for that. With that, we are getting pretty close to time, so I'm going to apologize because I know we weren't able to get to everyone who had comments on HVIP, or really any of our sections today. We covered a lot of material and heard some really great feedback and perspective from people. So again, thank you for participating. But I want everyone to know that this is just the beginning of our public process for the development of the fiscal year 2022-23 funding plan for clean transportation incentives. Over the next several months, we will continue hosting work groups on these projects, as well as potential policy changes for the projects we discussed today. Additionally, on July 21st, we will be hosting our second broader workshop on the funding plan. And before this workshop, we will release a draft funding plan, which includes our preliminary recommendations for the final funding plan. So this draft funding plan will really serve as a guide for conversations that we have on the July 21st workshop. And we expect that we'll be releasing the proposed funding plan in October with board consideration in November. So note that these dates are tentative and there may be changes, so please keep an eye out for Gov Delivery emails, and also check our website for updates on our schedule and to get more information about many of the work group meetings that were mentioned today. So I'd encourage everyone to subscribe to our Gov Delivery emails if you haven't already. And I will put a link to that in the chat where you can sign up in just a moment. And again, I'd really like to reiterate that our doors are always open, and we're happy to meet outside of our formal funding plan development schedule and one-on-one with stakeholders. And you're also always welcome to send us written comments if you'd prefer. So with that, a big thank you all for participating in our work group today and for sharing your thoughts and feedback. And so have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone. I'll get links into the chat with my email. So if anyone has any additional questions, grab that. We'll just keep the webinar up for a minute or so, so that folks can grab those last links and email addresses. But thank you all today, again, for participating today.